leading this mob.
This job would be great if it wasn't for the fucking customers.
What you want, Grizzly Adams?
Did you sell hubcaps for 72 Pinto hatchback?
Ooh, mini truck medics.
Bunch of easily led automatons.
Bunch of savages in this town.
It's important to have a job that makes a difference, boys. That's why I manually masturbate caged animals for artificial insemination.
That's fucked up, man.
Well, if you think that's offensive, check this out.
I'll fuck anything that moves.
37. My girlfriend sucked 37 dicks.
In a row? Wise ass too, huh? God, keep cracking wise.
Oh boy, it's gonna knock the hell out of my hemorrhoids.
You are a danger to both the dead and the living.
I like to think I'm a master of my own destiny.
Forget it. I don't want to deal with the guy that sells cigarettes to 4-year-olds.
Hey, are there any balls down there?
Not the biggest bear you ever seen, Dingleberry.
Would you like some making buckbells?
Did he say making fuck?
I'm not even supposed to be here today.
So, this is the start of something new. I've been doing the horror movie episodes for over a year now. And a few months ago, someone said, maybe as a joke, that I should do Kevin Smith movies. Well, I thought about it, and it kind of wasn't a bad idea, so here we are. This series is going to go for all of 2021, starting with this episode, and ending in December with Reboot. In between, I'm going to cover most of the movies that Kevin wrote and directed, and one TV series. And the best place to start is the beginning, right? So that's what we're going to do. This episode is on Clerks, and what made Kevin Smith decide to make it. Now, normally on the horror movie episodes, I have one guest. For this series, I'm going to have two. One of them is someone who's been on before, talking about Cannibal Holocaust, Josh Goldstein. How's it going, Josh?
Hey, Stacy. Going good. Thank you for having me.
Oh, no problem, man. The other guest is someone who's been on Superfantastic before, talking about Chris Chan, PodVanDam producer Jonah. How's it going, Jonah?
Hey, what's up, man? I decided I'm Randall, and Josh Goldstein's definitely Dante.
I think that's 100% accurate.
I thought you guys were going to call me Snowball, and I would have taken that.
Oh no!
As well.
Quick with the grease, Josh. Quick with the grease. So, I sort of know the answer to this already, and it's kind of why I asked the two of you to do this episode. How do you guys feel about Kevin Smith and his movies?
Oh, wow. Josh, do you want to go first?
Yeah, no, sure. I love every one of his movies. There's just something about that, like early 90s feel, dialogue, everything that he wrote kind of, and the fact that what he does stays so consistent, like you know exactly what's a Kevin Smith movie, good or bad, you just know what it is. And it's always been just, you know, who I, as a kid and even, you know, teenager, late teenager into my 20s, all those things just kind of worked. And that just is a strong memory I have of the 90s. And you know, my favorite timeline, I think if there was any better time to be alive for me, it would be, you know, the mid to late 90s. So everything he does is always kind of top of mind for me.
Right on. And Jonah, your opinion of Kevin and his movies?
So when I was, Clerks came out in 94, I think. I'm not exactly sure when like my video store got it, because I'm assuming it was probably a little bit later.
It was 95.
Okay, so I went to the video store. I didn't have a lot of friends, so I would rent videos. My parents would take me to rent videos a lot on the weekends, and I would just pick out a couple, and that would be my weekend. I'd watch the movies. And I accidentally rented Clerks and Mallrats at the same time, so actually it must have been later, because obviously if Mallrats was out, and I didn't know they had anything to do with each other. So I got home, and this is like pre-internet. So I got home and watched them in the right order somehow on accident. And like my mind was blown when like these characters are showing up in the second movie and the names are the same or whatever. But also, other than maybe not that it was an independent movie, but like other than the movie The Warriors, which was like the first movie I watched that made me want to make films, because I did end up going to film school. Clerks was probably the first like truly indie movie I ever saw, and that made me, much like Kevin seeing Slacker, it was like the first movie that made me be like, wow, I could actually do this. And I loved that movie. I love that movie a lot. And but to ask me what I feel about Kevin Smith, I don't know, man. I feel like this is like a really lame metaphor, but I feel like Kevin Smith is like Third Eye Blind, right? So like Third Eye Blind made Third Eye Blind the album. So Clerks is like Third Eye Blind the album, and Kevin Smith is like Third Eye Blind the band. But the difference is you can see Third Eye Blind the band now, and they'll still play Jumper, and they'll play all those songs you want to hear, and it's awesome. But you see Kevin Smith movies now, and there's not a lot of Clerks 1 in those movies. You don't see a lot of I don't see a lot of what made me love him in his later movies. So I mean, I think Kevin Smith is a normal dude who in a industry where you kind of got to be someone who knows someone to get stuff done. He did exactly everything he wanted to do. Didn't have a lot of people telling him to change or what to do. And I think it's awesome. And so like, I don't enjoy Kevin Smith movies other than Clerks, but I'm happy that he exists, I guess.
I will tell you that to bring it to that though too, if you look at his writing, the movies he's written are those consistent Kevin Smith, even if it's that Great North universe that he built or whatever, and then he did. But the movies that he directed are nowhere near the quality that should be expected from somebody who wrote, Clerks. Like Cop Out was terrible, and when he
but Cop Out's not his. Cop Out.
That's what I'm saying. When he directs movies that he doesn't write, the quality is not there. Like you can't. I don't like calling it a Kevin Smith anything if he didn't write the movie. You know what I mean? It just doesn't feel right.
I agree with you, and that's why we're not covering Cop Out on this.
Right.
Yeah, I just, as a person who does creative writing, not professionally or anything, but I've written scripts and stuff like that. I feel like you have this big notebook, right, of ideas, and that notebook, it's almost like if you're in a band, right? Your first album, you had your whole life to write. They say you have your whole life to write your first album, and you have like a year to write your second album. I feel like that's Kevin Smith, dude. And there's specific things in Clerks where I'm like, dude, this is a notebook idea. Like this is a joke or an anecdote or something he's had in his head for a long time that he had to put in this movie. Like, the Star Wars conversation or, the Snowball story or whatever. And like, there's a lot of those moments in Clerks, and that's what makes Clerks like banger after banger after banger of these awesome jokes. And then he had to write more movies. And then it's like, okay, well now you have a year to write another movie. So I think he suffered a little bit from, in my opinion, because I know a lot of people love Kevin Smith and they love all his movies. I think that was his notebook of ideas movie, and then after that, he had to start from scratch. So,
well, you are more right than maybe you know, or maybe you do know. But I would say that I think while I agree with most of that, because there's definitely been a fall off, especially with the most recent movie. I think the notebook ideas, kind of carried through a few films. Like, I think it made it a little further than Clerks, but I understand completely why somebody who really liked Clerks might not really like Mallrats or Chasing Amy, because they're such different types of film.
Yeah, but I don't know how you couldn't like Mallrats, but that's for another day. Mallrats is just a top 10 echelon, like 90s, like, that was me every day in Mallrats.
I didn't rewatch Mallrats for this. I watched Clerks last night. Just to freshen up because I haven't seen it in a while, and it holds up. It's crazy how well it holds up. That movie, so not only good, it's like inspiring. It makes me want to write shit again. But like, I don't know. I haven't seen Mallrats in a while. I really did also enjoy Mallrats. Like I said, I watched them back to back, but I'm not sure I've seen Mallrats since I was in high school. So I honestly couldn't tell you.
It's a different feel though. Like this is so independent. I think one of the things that for me appealed to me, and much like you, Jonah, this movie made me think I could make movies. And then I didn't go to film school, but me and my friends made a bunch of movies in very much a Kevin Smith kind of way. So to me, like Clerks is so special because of that influence on me. And I think, all of us are relatively the same age. This movie is very of its time and spoke to kind of our generation and the people that were a little bit older than us, like Gen Xers.
it's definitely an awesome pay it forward gift that like Kevin Smith could, you know, receive the gift of Slacker from Linkletter and make him see that and be like, I can do this. And then have Clerks have that same effect on so many other people, I think is kind of just a nice, you know.
Oh, absolutely. To the point where like last year was terrible. It's 2021 now. So
right.
2019, I saw Kevin Smith do an appearance at Youngstown State University, and there was an 18-year-old kid who got up and asked a question during the Q&A part and talked about how Clerks was an influence on him. And Kevin pointed out that kid wasn't even cum when Clerks was made. And
of course, he had to be dirty about it, dude. That's one of the things, man. He had to make it dirty, right?
Correct. But like there was this moment for me where like when the first evening with Kevin Smith happened, I was at Kent State. I was at that film, like at that spoken word thing. Yeah. I was that kid. And then for me to see that many years later, like to see that influence carries on is kind of crazy.
And that's why, like, you know, I joke around and be like, you know, I always on Twitter or whatever, Kevin Smith stinks and all his movies are terrible or whatever. But like, I acknowledge things that I don't personally care for still hold value. And obviously the fact that Kevin Smith can still inspire, like, you know, it's like rap from when we were kids, right? Everyone our age thinks that that's the best rap that was ever created, right? But you play Tupac.
Because that's true.
but you play Tupac to a kid who's 17 and he's like, this is the worst shit I've ever heard, dude. And that's Tupac, one of the great, like considered one of the most prolific, like greatest rappers of all time, right? Even Wu-Tang. You'll play Wu-Tang for a kid who's 15. I mean, a lot of kids that are young like Wu-Tang, but like they think it sucks. Like for Kevin Smith to like transcend filmmaking or whatever it is that much and still inspire kids, like there's a lot of you know, critically acclaimed people in music, movies, whatever, who can't inspire that for that long, you know. So that's really cool.
Well, to tell the story of Clerks, we have to tell the story of Kevin first, because they're kind of the same story. Kevin was born in Red Bank, New Jersey on August 2nd, 1970 to Grace and Donald Smith. His dad was a postal worker who, according to Kevin, did not like his job at all. He worked midnight shifts, like sorting mail. That would be an influence on Kevin's choices later on in life. He grew up in Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey, and was raised as a Catholic. He was an altar boy. As a kid, he loved Star Wars, which I think every kid at that time loved Star Wars. His dad would pull him out of school for half days to take him to see movies. So Kevin was always the first kid to see the new Star Wars movie. His dad took him to see Jaws. His dad took him to see, like, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Did your parents ever do cool shit like that for you guys?
Yes, that was when I was a kid. My brother is not a movie guy. I became a movie guy at a very young age. My mother took me. We saw every horror movie together. She didn't care what the rating was. My brother and I had HBO in our bedroom at 6. So we were watching everything, and I don't know if he didn't take on like what movies meant to like me now, but it was my mom and dad did not care what we watched. So I was able to watch anything I wanted, and if I could get into it, you know, if I could go to the theater and they'd let me in, my mom didn't care if they let me in. It was very cool.
My mom was very much the same way. She let me watch whatever I wanted to, but she wasn't into taking me to the theater. But she showed me Frankenstein when I was like 5.
Well, like my dad and my brother are the same. They're just fraidy scared of everything, you know, like my brother who gets all up in arms when I dragged him to horror movies. But my mom was like, all right, I'll do everything. She went on rides when we were kids, you know, she did the movies. My brother didn't go on rides. My dad and him sat outside calling everybody nuts for getting on a roller coaster, you know, that kind of crap. So
yeah.
It was my mom who was like, let's do it. So we saw it like every movie in the 80s together, and you know, she took me to see the Exorcist and the Exorcist 2 and 3. And, you know, that was like, you know, she was like, yeah, you can think about it for yourself. You know, there was, you know, having HBO in our room at 6 and then at nighttime when it got after dark and the porn was on, you know, what were they going to do? So, you know, might as well lean into it, right?
That explains a lot, Josh Goldstein.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
My parents would let me stay up and watch Johnny Carson when I was, I guess, very young. I loved it. that was the one time I could stay up. I had a little black and white TV in my room, and I was allowed to watch Johnny Carson on it. And then I remember when Beverly Hills 90210 was around. That was the one night a week I was allowed to stay up and watch that show. I loved it. I don't have any idea why that was the thing I loved, but I did. And then apparently, because I'm trying to figure out my age, when I was 13 or 14, my dad took me to see Pulp Fiction in the theater.
Oh,
and, the Gimp scene was an interesting, I don't know. There's a lot of scenes in that movie that, like, I always tell my dad, like, that was the first thing that, like, me and my dad both walked out and, like, had a conversation about what we liked about that movie. And because we both loved it, we walked out of that movie and we were like, holy shit. Because it's probably, I mean, my dad's in his 60s now. That's probably like the first crazy piece of independent film that he had seen. I mean, probably since the 70s. I'm sure he saw avant-garde movies and shit all the time. But, like, that movie was pretty groundbreaking when it came out. And, like, for me and him, sure. And for me to be that young and for us to walk out of that movie and actually have, like, a conversation about film together, it was like a cool moment, even though it was super awkward in the moment, like during the Gimp scene and stuff when I was in the theater. Like, my dad would do dumb shit all the time. Like, he took me to see Gallagher a bunch of times. I don't even know why they let me in, because I was probably like 8 or 10 years old. And he had a lot of dirty jokes in those things. It wasn't all smashing watermelons. I mean, there was, like, sex jokes in there. And it seemed normal at the time, but thinking back, I'm like, why did no adults around, like, call child services on my dad for taking me to that? But
I don't remember Gallagher.
It was a different time.
Yeah, it was.
When I was 12, my brother had open heart surgery, so my mom slept on the floor of the hospital, and my dad and I went home together, and we needed something to, like, kill the time, and he rented Total Recall. So sitting around with, you know, 3 boob ladies, you know, like sitting with my dad and seeing a chick with 3 boobs, and I didn't know really what to say to him, you know, like
right.
Those are the influences you get. To watch that was the best.
I just remembered my dad and I watched Basic Instinct together too on video one time, and that I just remembered that. Yeah,
that's an uncomfortable watch.
It is. The leg uncrossing scene. Yeah.
That's not what you want to watch with your parents.
No, it is not.
So Kevin went to Henry Hudson High School, and teenage Kev was big into Saturday Night Live and Sam Kinison. You can already see that there's starting to be some influences. Trenchcoat. He did sketch comedy with his friends. These were different friends than the ones that he has later, but kind of important to the story of Clerks. Ernie O'Donnell and Mike Bellicose. Freshman year, he entered a talent show, and those 3 did sketch comedy as a group called the Squads, which they lifted from the Blues Brothers. They continued to do this throughout high school and kind of got, like, high school famous for it. But for one reason or another, in their senior year, Kevin and Ernie had a falling out. That falling out leads to Kevin hanging out at the Highlands Rec Center and becoming friends with Brian Johnson and Walt Flanagan. Meeting them changes a lot of things in Kevin's life. Kevin gets into comic books because of Walt. Brian gets Kevin into hockey. Do you guys have any strong feelings on comics or hockey, Josh?
Yeah, of course, dude. I mean, when we in the 80s, I lived in Queens. I don't know if you guys ever remember on MTV, they had an anchor named Gideon Yago. He used to do MTV News.
Oh yeah.
So Gideon Yago and I were like best friends from the time we were like 4 until I moved till the time I moved out of to Great Neck from Queens to Long Island. And him and I used to go to a Forbidden Planet in Kew Forest, Queens, and the 2 of us would go and we read like Hamster Vice. We listened to Weird Al together. You know, we spent days in the comic shop, just literally reading, you know, any new comics, like all the weird Dark Horse stuff, Flaming Carrot, like that whole universe where the Tick came from. Yeah. So, you know, that was everything to me. The comic books, you know, the new release days, and, you know, hockey, forget it. I mean, hockey to this day is my favorite sport. You know, it just, my dad's just his influence on my brother and I for hockey. It's the only sport that the 3 of us ever agreed on. So, you know, it you know, every time I hear anything with Kevin Smith, I feel like it was me, you know, as a kid. So it just keeps drawing me to him.
I kind of picked up on that as I was as I was doing all the research for this, and it was all stuff I knew, but it just kind of drew the lines together for me, where I was like, "Wow, this is checking a lot of Josh Goldstein boxes." I love comic books and hockey too. Jonah, are you into hockey at all?
So, Ohio never had we never really had an NHL team or anything. So,
Right.
Hockey wasn't like a thing that like our high school didn't have a hockey team. I mean, they do now, but when I was there, hockey wasn't like a big part. Like we had the Lumberjacks, which I think was like a minor league hockey team in Cleveland that everyone would go to because the tickets were cheap and everything, and it was fun. But hockey wasn't like a big part of our thing growing up. I had my only experience with hockey as a kid is I don't remember how we even got it because we were poor and didn't have anything. But we had one of those like dome hockey things where you turn the little. It's like foosball. But it's hockey.
Bubble hockey.
Yeah, bubble hockey.
Yeah, bubble hockey.
We had like a pretty awesome bubble hockey machine, and we would play it all the time because like we didn't have video games or anything. That's like all we had. So I think the two teams were maybe the Flyers and I don't remember, maybe Detroit. That was Detroit,
Probably.
right? I have no idea. But I just remember like staring at the bubble hockey machine. In comics, we had I really loved comics when I was a kid because like I love the X-Men cartoon. But then when I tried to get into actual comic books, unfortunately the comic books shop in our town was called Land of Cran. I don't know. That's probably from comics, right? They were like the bad kind of comic shop. Like you walk in and if you didn't know about comics, they were like total assholes to you. So it just turned me off from comics completely. And I didn't really get into actually like going to a comic. Now I'm in Cleveland we have Carol and Jim's or whatever it's called, a very good comic store where they're very nice to you.
Right.
But I didn't get into comics till later because unfortunately we had like a shithead comics shop in our town. So.
Right.
Sure, it's like going into a GameStop and they treat you like an idiot when you don't know the. I hate that.
Oh, it's like the record store. Yeah, it's like the record store thing. Yeah.
Oh yeah, which is it's one of my biggest gripes with record stores, and it's why I forever liked My Mind's Eye. Because that dude was smart enough to know that even though he knew more about music than you, he shouldn't talk down to you about it.
Oh, yeah. Because the guy from My Mind's Eye is a fucking dick, but he knows to not be a dick to customers because they're fucking customers.
Correct.
But yeah.
Yeah, I've seen him like with customers don't know a fucking thing about a fucking thing. Instead of like tearing them down, he's like, well, no, you should buy this record.
Oh, yeah.
Which is the smart way to run a record store.
It's selling things.
Yeah. Go figure, like shitting on your customers, not a good business plan.
Right. Right.
Well, hockey's how Ed Hapstack comes into the picture for these guys too, and he plays in a lot in the making of Clerks later. This is also the time period when Jason Mewes enters Kevin's life. And Kevin didn't like him at all at first, because Jason Mewes was basically who he is in Clerks as a kid. Kevin just basically took what he saw and wrote it into the film. So that crew of Walt, Brian, Mewes, and Kevin did a number of things together, including hang out at the mall. One time, while they were at the mall, they stole a wig off a mall mannequin and had Walt put it on backwards. For the rest of the day, they introduced him to everyone as Kevin's cousin from Russia, who was a rock star there. Again, seeing how real life and a notebook is shaping everything in this movie. So employment's another huge factor that shapes his future. And after high school, Kevin needed a job. He had a few different ones, including digging graves and working at Domino's, which he quit to go see Batman with Walt and Brian. Eventually, he lands the job at RST Video and Quick Stop. Quickly afterwards, he gets Brian a job there. Their time was mostly spent hanging out, making fun of the customers more than it was working. It has to be pointed out, though, how cool Kevin thought Brian was. He thought Brian was the coolest guy he had ever met in his life. Another person who enters the picture at Quick Stop is Vincent Pereira. Kevin used to bring a TV over to Quick Stop so he could watch Twin Peaks. One day when Vincent was in there working, like restocking milk, he asked him if he liked David Lynch movies. The two bonded over their love of film. Do either of you guys like Twin Peaks?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't try to watch it until like a couple years ago when it got really popular again. And I didn't like not like it. It had like the Star Wars thing for me. Like if you didn't get into Star Wars when you were a kid, I wouldn't expect you to like it now because the original Star Wars movies are so corny. You just have to have nostalgia for them. And
Right.
I feel like I tried to watch Twin Peaks with zero like memory of it from when it was actually out. And it was fine. I think I just like lost track halfway through. I was busy with other stuff and never finished it. But I don't have any I don't really like David Lynch at all. So that doesn't really mean anything to me.
I am with you. So like, here's my thing. Like, I like Twin Peaks. I think we're all probably of an age where when it was on TV, I remember it being on TV, but it wasn't like on my radar.
Yeah.
I got into it when it came out on
mature.
DVD.
Yeah, when it was on TV, it was a little more mature. Like people kind of watched it as more of like an event thing because it was so weird. Like when we would talk about, oh, did you get a chance? But yeah, some of those scenes were very strange. I mean, that was what the draw was. If you were waiting to see some weird, backwards guy and everything else, but
right.
I wasn't, David Lynch didn't do anything for me. It wasn't like, let me actively search out anything he did at that time.
Yeah, it was more like in my 20s when I got into Twin Peaks, which by that point I was like, oh, this rules. Plus, I had seen like a bunch of David Lynch films at that point. Some that I liked, but I really feel like David Lynch is a guy that if he's not given like a firm structure that he needs to be within, he gets a little too David Lynch. You know?
Yeah.
Like
me and my best friend in film school, Matt Schmidt, we sort of had this like adversarial relationship with anyone taking filmmaking seriously. They were like our sworn enemies. And our like the way we became friends is we were like we lived and died by like the State and Stella, like those guys. Who literally their whole thing is like taking nothing seriously. And making a joke out of literally everything they do. So, I mean, we were like, anyone who was like trying to make David Lynch type shit or do anything weird or like, anything artsy or whatever, they were like the worst to us in film school, man. So like, I think I've just never really been a fan of like overly weird stuff in film at all. So David Lynch just never did it for me.
Yeah, my favorite stuff from David Lynch is like Blue Velvet and Dune, like
right,
and Twin Peaks. But most of that is shit. Like even Twin Peaks, while it has its weirdness, it still has a structure of like kind of murder mystery,
Yep.
Where like other stuff, like when you get into like Mulholland Drive and Lost Highway and stuff, it's just like there's too much like, oh, the lamp means that his mom was mean to him when he was 7. Like, I don't know.
Right.
Well, Twin Peaks plays another small role in all of this later on. Another thing Vince did was teach Kevin that film could be watched in a certain way. He got him to buy a Laserdisc player, which in the early 90s, that was really expensive and a big deal. They also started seeing ads in the Village Voice for indie films playing in New York City at the Angelica Theater. So they would close the Quick Stop and drive up to the city for midnight showings. Prior to this, Kevin had mostly seen just mainstream movies, like the stuff his dad would go take him to, and like the movies that he had found in the video store. The Angelica opened up a new world for him. One of the films that he saw turned out to be pretty life-changing. On Friday, August 2nd, 1991, Kevin and Vincent go to the Angelica to see Richard Linklater's Slacker. On the way home from that film, he talks about how he wants to become a filmmaker, and it sets things in motion for Clerks to exist. Now, while all this is going on, Kevin's girlfriend is going to Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh and would constantly pressure him to go back to school. He had done a semester or two at a local community college after high school. He would take the train to Pittsburgh to visit her, which I feel like that had to just be miserable train rides. Recently, and I mean like the past few weeks recently, he found a notebook that he thought was gone, and in it he found original notes about writing what would become Clerks on August 29th, 1991. He found the film school for him in the same place that he found out about indie film, the Village Voice. The Vancouver Film School had an ad in the paper which pointed out it was an 8-month program and more hands-on than most 3 to 4 year film schools. It was also far less expensive at $9,000. His original thinking was, If I can go to school and learn how to operate equipment, I can come home, teach Walt and Ed and Brian how to use the equipment, and we can make a film together. So in early 1992, Kevin Smith heads off to film school. You went to film school, Jonah. How was your experience with that?
I went to a scam college that got sued by the government and doesn't exist anymore because they were cranking out. So they had this, like, they would always tout that they had like a 75% job placement rate, but they were cranking out more photography degrees than there were photography jobs in the United States as a whole. And that's what like the finding was. So they got sued, and it was determined that they had to let everyone who was still enrolled there finish, and then they had to be shut down. And I always had this funny visual of like the last student walking out the door and just hearing the lock click behind them. Because the last classes there had to be like nobody in there, man. And like there was like a snack counter and all that shit just probably had to be shut down. Like it was probably so depressing to be like the last people there. But I went to the Art Institute of Pittsburgh. Just, it's like an ITT tech kind of, for-profit college that had like
I know the Art Institute.
Yeah, I had like a culinary program and a photography program. And so like I said, I met Matt Schmidt there, who kind of had the same vibe as me as far as like, this place is a joke. But like my life was completely fucked before I went there. So like if I wouldn't have gone to school, I would probably be dead. So, we realized very early on in our stay at film school that like everyone there was a total stoner idiot, and our teachers loved us because we could put in like 20% effort and still do better than everyone else at that school.
Right.
Like we had a script writing class where we had to like read a scene from Good Will Hunting like in front of the class, right? And me and Matt Schmidt went in 45 minutes and memorized the entire scene and did it from heart, and like the teacher was completely blown away, and like no one else in the class did that, and we would get an A, you know what I mean? So like I got a bachelor's degree. I got like a 4-year degree in like 2 years, 2.5 years there, because like I would actually just go to class and do everything. You know what I mean? But also like I've talked about it on PodVanDam, like the first year I was there, I got some like weird scholarships from Ohio for having to take, like I took Ritalin when I was a kid, and for some reason in Ohio, if you did anything like that, you get like a scholarship to college.
Oh, really?
Yeah, my mom's a teacher. She found it somehow. So like I was in my first semester at art school, and the counselor calls me into her office, and she's like, "Hey, I almost don't want to tell you this, but I have to." She's like, "You're getting a $10,000 student loan refund check. I'm about to hand it to you." She's like, "Legally, I'm not allowed to say this, but this is the lowest interest rate you're ever going to get on money. You should like put a down payment on a house or something. Please don't waste this money." And I proceeded to waste all of that money. But one of the things I bought was like the top of the line digital camera that was out, like video camera that was out at the time. I don't even remember what the model was. It's probably obsolete now because I was in school right before HD came out and like all this other stuff. So everything we used, all the editing equipment, everything I learned in that college became obsolete like right afterwards.
What year was
that? 2001.
Okay, so that was probably like a G2 or something that you bought?
Yeah,
like
it was a Canon. It was a Canon. I cannot remember the model number, but it was like $3,000, the camera.
Yeah. Oh, maybe you had like an X1.
Man, if you said it, I might remember it. I honestly don't remember, but I'm
just trying to remember because like we ran the scam where we would like buy the camera.
Yeah.
And then as soon as we were done filming the movie, we would sell the camera.
Yeah, that's a good move. I just bought the camera. So the cool thing about that school, even though it was a scam, is they had this like cave in the basement where you could go and you could check out any equipment you could imagine, lighting, sound equipment, cameras, like top of the line, everything. And then they had the editing rooms that you could use. And nobody used it because, like I said, everyone that went there, it seemed to us, were like stoners whose parents like forced them to go to college. Because we took like a year or two off between high school and college because it was 2001. I graduated in 99. Right. All the other kids there, it was like 13th grade. Like they were like they went there right after high school. You know what I mean? Right, so we were kind of like, we were like smart enough to be like, man, we're paying all this money for this stupid fucking place. We should use it. Where everyone else there was like there because their parents made them go there and their parents were paying for it. So I mean, we took advantage of all that. And like I said, I got that money and I bought the cameras that they were teaching us on, you know, so we didn't have to rent them out from the thing. We just had one all the time. Yeah. So yeah, film school was cool. It was a stupid school, but I'm glad I did it. Like I said, I'd probably be dead if I didn't. And I met Matt there, which was cool. So
I went to a recording school that was very similar to what Kevin went to for film school. And I don't regret it. I learned a lot in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
Well, at film school, Kevin meets some other people who become very important to the story of Clerks. The most important being Scott Mosier. The two of them bonded over a dislike for authority and a common sense of humor. The Star Wars scene in Clerks is directly inspired by a conversation they had at school where they were sitting in like the cafeteria talking about Star Wars, and there was a dude next to them that kind of chimed in. In school, for the projects, people had to pitch ideas for films, and then one of them would get made, and everybody else would like work on the film that gets picked, right? So Kevin's idea was called Mayday, a documentary about a pre-op transsexual named Imelda May. That's pretty progressive for 1992. The thing is, they cared more about winning the pitch and not having to work on someone else's film than actually making the film itself, and it became really obvious shortly after it was picked. They end up going to the transvestite ball and filming with her for one night. Then she disappears on them, ghosted, left them fucked. So without a subject, you really can't make a documentary, right? So they shift gears and turn it into a story of the documentary crumbling apart. It is kind of a half documentary, half scripted film. They let all the crew vent on camera about how shitty Kevin and Scott were. You can find it. It's pretty entertaining to watch. Two Kevin Smith signature things came out of that shoot. One is the two shot from the waist up, and the other one is sticking to the script. And in fairness, that had kind of been a thing since he had done like the sketch comedy stuff in high school, but it really quickly found his way in filmmaking where you don't really ad lib in a Kevin Smith movie. But that two shot is like the signature of Clerks.
Wait, did you say you don't ad lib in his movie? His movies, it's all this dialogue is scripted dialogue?
Yeah.
My goodness. I
was going to talk about it probably later, but that to me, a Kevin Smith movie always sounds like a high school play to me, which is the thing that I think is charming in Clerks. It's very charming. And ironically, Dante and Veronica are the only two actors who were actors, I think, for the most part. And they come from
the only main actors. Yeah.
And they come from community theater, but ironically, they're the only two actors who don't sound like they're in a high school play in Clerks. But that's always been, so like I said, it's charming in Clerks. And it's like I think I said a couple months ago, like, it's like Aaron Sorkin is like Ivy League Kevin Smith. Like, you can tell it's like they've never heard a normal person talk before when they write this dialogue. But yeah, I mean, that's why it makes sense to me. I actually have never heard that he was really against ad-libbing, but like he thinks I'm learning a lot right now in this as you go. And you told me that he was like high school famous. Yeah. Kevin Smith is totally the nerd in high school that's cocky because he was also like the most popular nerd in high school, because like that speaks a lot to the fact that he's like, no, I wrote this dialogue. It's the best. No one's allowed to change it. You can tell because I feel like a lot of his dialogue is very sing-songy high school play. Right. Like it's not how people talk. And I mean, it's entertaining to watch, but it's definitely not. I mean, there's a lot of movies that have a ton of ad-libbing. You watch an actor like Jason Bateman and you're like, why you're so drawn to him because he talks like a normal person speaks. Right. Kevin Smith movies are like the opposite of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you know, what's crazy is we won't get into it in this one, but as Kevin becomes a director and starts working with real actors, that shit becomes a real problem.
Oh, I'm sure because he's another thing. Like, again, I don't want to just shit on Kevin Smith, but like he's fucking cocky, dude. And that's one of the reasons I don't like him, because I hate people that are full of themselves. I feel like you need to kind of have a sense of humor about yourself and be self-deprecating. That dude definitely thinks he's the coolest dude ever. And that makes sense, man, because he doesn't want anyone to like change his words.
Yeah, I mean, he was pretty strict about it. And as the second of his 2 semesters approached, Kevin also decided that rather than possibly working on someone else's film, he'd just drop out. So that let him get $5,000 of his tuition back, which he could then put towards making a film when he got home. So Kevin and Scott cut a deal, right? He would go home and start writing. Scott would do the same while also at school. And whoever had something ready first, the other one would go to where they were and make it. That whole thing seems a little tilted, if you ask me. Like, Scott is still in school. Kevin's going to go home and work at the fucking Quick Stop. And this also left Scott alone at film school. Enter Dave Klein. Dave Klein becomes friends with Scott as that second semester goes on, and they end up working together on Dave's short, Willem Black, which Dave shot, Scott wrote and edited. And after school for a little bit of time before Clerks happens, Dave ends up going back to Seattle to try to find work. Dave Klein, and so I don't forget to talk about it later. We originally, to pull the curtain back on this episode, we're going to record this back in November and didn't for a couple of reasons. And I'm glad we didn't, because something happened with Dave Klein in between then and now. Like, if you look up Dave's IMDb, it's long. He's done a lot of stuff, a lot of Kevin's movies, but he's been the cinematographer on a lot of things. The most recent thing that he was a cinematographer on was an episode of The Mandalorian.
Oh, wow.
Imagine Dave Klein being the dude who like originally made the film that made like the Star Wars discussion a big thing, working on like the coolest Star Wars thing in forever. I thought that was pretty fun.
Yeah, is he the guy in the Making of Clerks documentary who is like, he said he pictured Clerks in color?
Yes.
Is that okay? I was just
that's Dave
trying to
Klein.
Put a face to him. Okay.
He's also the dude, and we'll get into this later on, that walks in and is like, do you have hubcaps for a 72 Pinto hatchback?
yeah.
Mini Truck and Magazine. So while they're at school making that film, Kevin's back in Jersey. He starts writing immediately, and he knew what he wanted to make, a film set in a convenience store. That idea had been suggested by Vincent long before Kevin ever went to film school. But it was because he read an interview with Robert Rodriguez where he said to take stock of what you have when writing and make your first film based on that really locked it in. Now, for El Mariachi, that meant that he had a bus, a guitar, and a turtle. For Kevin, that meant he had the convenience store. What's you guys' favorite Robert Rodriguez film?
I'd say either El Mariachi or From Dusk Till Dawn.
Jonah, do you have a favorite, or do you not like Rodriguez?
I was quickly trying to look up his IMDb because I don't know anything about him really, but I do love Dusk Till Dawn. The funniest story about Dusk Till Dawn is when I was in college, my friend Doobie, she was from Venezuela, and she was newly in the States to go to college, and we put that movie on, and she knew absolutely nothing about what was going to happen like 25, 30 minutes into the movie. She thought it was just like a normal crime movie. And we were very high. And when the vampires started happening, she fucking lost her goddamn mind, dude, and thought that, like, I don't know if she thought only she could see it or what, but like she was like, her mind was blown. So, I mean, I have a special place in my heart for that movie because of that story.
Dude, that's how it felt in the theaters. I don't even remember seeing a trailer for that. I just remember going and being like, this should be cool. And then it went in that direction. I was like, what the hell am I watching? What is this? Like, that's a good one.
So what's crazy is that same thing kind of happened to me. Like, I rented it, didn't realize it was like a vampire movie, just watched it, and then partway through I was like, whoa, what the fuck's going on? There's vampires? This rules. So that's Dusk Till Dawn's my favorite too. So Kevin ends up talking to the store owner, Mrs. Topper, and cuts the deal where he's going to come back to work at the store, but he gets to use the two stores to shoot the movie. Kevin would sit in the store while he was working.
Wait, Stacey, let me stop you for a minute and ask you one question. You too, Jonah. Let me ask you, is that kind of innovation left anymore? Can we get people who want to do something from scratch, like grassroots like that, get an opportunity like that? I don't really think. It's unfortunate, the world we live in now, but I don't know how often that kind of opportunity to take what little money you have left, make a deal with somebody who lives in and, who works in this place, to get your hands on something like that kind of innovation is so far gone. It's sad when you hear stuff like that. I get like very down on it because I'm like, oh, those days where you could just, you cut a deal with the person who owns this shop, and you whatever little money you have, it's so hard to do anything now.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of good examples of similar to what you're saying. Like, I think I don't know how familiar you are with High Maintenance. It was a web series, and then it got picked up by HBO. It's really fucking good. If you've never seen it, you should binge the web series and then binge the HBO series. It's basically about a dude who's a drug dealer in New York City, and every episode is him, but there's like a circle of every episode's like none of them tie together. So it's all other characters that come in and out of his life and blah, blah, blah. But I think they just made that for like nothing as a web series and it got picked up. And then the other two things I was thinking of, I always thought it was very impressive, even though I'm not a huge fan of either of them really, is It's Always Sunny and Workaholics, because none of those guys were anything before those shows. So I always thought it was really cool, especially Workaholics, because like that show ended up being very funny and doing it's so well, and like all those guys work forever now because of it. And none of those guys, I don't think, even barely did stand up before Workaholics. Like they were basically nothing really. I guess Lonely Island would be another example. Those guys weren't really anything. So I mean, I think it still happens to a degree of like funny guys who trick people with a lot of money into giving them a lot of money. But I think to what you're saying is like, if me getting a couple $1,000s together and shooting in like a closed down restaurant or something, and then, getting that made into something, maybe I'm not plugged in enough to the indie film world anymore to know if that still happens. But I think you're right. I don't think it's as common as maybe it was in the indie film boom of the 90s,
So at some point, I kind of want to cover this on here, not this particular show, but just on like this feed about like making indie film. Because I think it has definitely changed, and there are things about it that, as a 40-something, confuse me. Because, like, so Kevin was in a situation where, like, he was shooting on film. Video hadn't really gotten to a point where it was, like, when we were in our 20s, where you could shoot something on video and actually have it released. So you had to learn to shoot on film, and shit was difficult, but the market was so small. Like, you didn't have a lot of competition. Then by the time, like, the 2000s roll around, I think there's a lot more competition, but there's not so many more places for it all to go, so it kind of bottlenecks.
Yeah.
And now, I would think, and it blows my mind that I don't see more, like, you can shoot, like, it blows my mind that, like, if you have the newest iPhone, right? Or if you even have, like, the last iPhone, it shoots a better quality picture than the thousands of dollars camera that me and my friends had in the 2000s.
Yep.
And you have fucking YouTube. You can just put the fucking thing out there and market people to see it. You know what I mean? Like,
and you have editing software almost does it for you now. Like, we were learning on like Avid, like machines where we had to like splice shit together and shit, like giant fucking like editing stations that took up a whole room in the school. You know what I mean? Like, you can download a pirated version of like Final Cut Pro and just like watch a YouTube video and learn it. It's like, and like you said, that you think that would. And all these kids want to do with it is make TikTok.
Maybe that entrepreneurship aspect of it, the freedom that almost like that rebellious nature of filming something like that is gone. It's something. I guess it's just maybe I feel like because I like a grumpy old man about it, but that real creativity and entrepreneurship of picking something up and creating something that you think is going to be life-changing for yourself just because you had to do it. I feel like it's not there anymore. I feel like the attention span isn't there for it in a lot of the youth.
I think the thing is the want has moved to other places where like you see a lot more like, so kids might not make a movie now. Instead, they're like a Twitch gamer, or they're making like a weird YouTube show with their friends. And maybe not trying to put the effort into making like a full-blown movie production. Maybe that's where it's at. But I'm definitely, I don't have my thumb on the pulse of that shit at all. So
I'd also argue that it's when you're a kid and you see YouTubers and TikTokers and people on Twitch monetizing things in a way that people couldn't monetize in the 90s. I would argue that because these YouTubers are making their own shit on YouTube, getting clicks, monetizing it, making a ton of money, and then getting deals from, networks like Bravo and all this stuff and bigger things to be online. From that, I would argue that that's the version of, taking your college fund and blowing it on trying to make an indie film and try to get someone to see it. Yeah. Instead, where you're losing money, kids nowadays, because they're smarter, are making fucking TikToks and monetizing them. Because if you get enough hits on a TikTok, you make money. Same with YouTube. Right. And then they're making money off the shit they're doing. And then people are seeing that and giving them development deals based on TikTok and YouTube. So like, because we're old, we don't see the value in that, because Clerks, things like Clerks and Pulp Fiction and cool Reservoir Dogs and blah, blah, blah are way cooler than a TikTok where someone like does a prank in public or whatever. It's just not for us. Attention spans are shorter, you know, so people have less time to consume TV and movies, and it's, you know, it's all circular. And then some young kid will come out and make another fucking Pulp Fiction or make another Clerks one day, and then movies will be cool again. So I mean, it's everything goes round and round like that.
I hope so. And talking about technology shrinking or being larger, Kevin would sit in the store in the Quick Stop and write this script on a Smith Corona word processor. Nice. Do you guys remember? Like, those things look like the size of a personal computer, like a giant box with a monitor, like a blip green monitor.
That's amazing.
The first draft took about a month to write. It was finished in December, on December 8th, 1992. The original script was more of a David Lynch style film about a guy working a midnight shift at a store and like all the strange people who came in. It wasn't really meant to be a comedy, but it turned out to be. That came from adding dialogue that you said, Jonah, that it doesn't sound like how regular people talk. Kevin said that he wrote it based on how he talked with his friends, and he had never heard that like represented on screen before. So maybe it isn't how normal people talk. Maybe it's just how him and his friends talk.
It's just It's so sing-songy because it you can tell it was a conversation that he had, that he wrote and edited and wrote and edited and wrote and edited in his head and on notebooks so many times.
Yeah.
That it's like if a nerd, you know, they say like the wit of the staircase, which is like you think of it's like George from Seinfeld. You think of what you should have said as soon as you leave the room. It's like if a nerd said the perfect coolest thing at the perfect coolest time about a thing like Star Wars, and had hours and days and months and weeks to edit it and then say it in the moment. So I mean, I guess it might be based on things that they said in real life, but I guarantee you they weren't as eloquent or articulate the first time they said them.
Right. Well, the original. To that point, the original title of this movie was Inconvenience, which is not good. Vincent Pereira didn't like it, and he suggested a bunch of titles, and one of those titles was Rude Clerks, which Kevin shorted down to what we have today with Clerks. Kevin sends Mosier the script. He digs it. The thing is, none of them knew how to budget a movie at all. They ended up using an article written by Peter Broderick for Filmmaker Magazine on budgets, where he printed the actual budgets of some movies, and they based theirs on Slacker.
Nice.
The original budget plan was that if they spent over $25,000, then they had to start to worry. In addition to the $5,000 that Kevin got back from dropping out of film school, he sold some of his comics and put a bunch of it on credit cards. He was working a $5 an hour job, so it was a pretty big risk. Scott ended up booking all the camera equipment and stuff because if you're shooting film, you're not buying cameras and stuff, you're renting them. So they booked all of that while he was still in Vancouver. He would wake up at like 4 a.m. and call places in New York City to do it, which to me sounds insane because Kevin was just in New Jersey. I don't know why he's making Scott do this shit, but okay. But Scott also hired the DP for the movie, Dave Klein. They start discussions about shooting the film in December of 1992. And shortly thereafter, a giant nor'easter floods the Highlands, flooding Kevin's house. The whole area was deemed a disaster area, and he ended up getting a check from FEMA for $3,000, which also went into the budget of Clerks. He stood fast that he was going to make the movie at the time he planned, and that on March 19th, 1993, he would start Clerks. This gets us to the casting. Now, you mentioned, Jonah, that like most of the people in this movie aren't real actors. And you're absolutely right. Like, almost none of them are. Plans change a lot in casting too. Like any movie I've ever covered, it's like, oh, well, we wanted this guy or this guy, but instead it's this guy. Yeah. This is very true with Clerks. Originally, the plan was to have Ernie O'Donnell as Dante and Kevin as Randall. That's why Randall has all the good lines. Mike Bellicose was supposed to be Silent Bob. He picked those guys because they were the only actors he knew. He needed more actors, though, so he reached out to Atlantic Highlands Playhouse and Joe Bagnoli that ran it. Joe ends up being the customer that watches the cat take a shit.
Yeah, I knew some of the older people are actors. You know, like I think the guy that dies in the bathroom and the guy that watches the cat take a shit. I knew they were definitely actors.
Yeah, they're like local theater actors.
Yeah.
Joe reached out to a few actors he knew from the theater, told them they should come in and audition. One of those was Marilyn Gigliotti. The actors all did like a normal monologue reading, like hers was out of a monologue book. And she picked one where she cried, and it blew Kevin and everyone's minds away because they had never seen an actress be able to cry on command before. So she landed the role of Veronica almost immediately. But another person that was at those auditions was Jeff Anderson. And he came not to audition for the movie at all. Jeff Anderson came just as a friend and to hang out and hit on actresses. During the audition, he asked Kevin as a joke if he could get up and read some of the J lines. So he gets up at the audition, reads these lines. He had never acted before. He was funny, but nobody really thought anything of it. It was just, Jeff got up and read some lines. Haha. So as they get closer to the time to shoot, Kevin has a realization that he can't play Randall and he needs somebody else to do it. He calls up Jeff and they read through the entire script. Jeff tries to talk Kevin out of doing it. He's like, look, man, you're spending all this money on this movie. I've never acted before. I do not think this is a good idea. I don't think I should do it. But Kevin insists and Jeff agrees. Brian O'Halloran wasn't there the first day of auditions. He came in the second day and read a monologue that was nothing like Dante. He came in, read it, left. You could tell he could act, but nobody was like, oh my God, that guy, there's Dante, right?
Yeah, he like forgot about the thing or something, I think he said, and ended up reading a monologue where he's like yelling and it's like a really passionate, like angry scene.
Yeah.
But I like you said with her crying and blowing him away, like I think Kevin was basically like, oh, this guy can actually act. We should just give him a ton of lines.
Right. Yeah. It was like, oh, well, we need to find something for this guy, but I don't know what it'll be. Right.
Right.
Because Ernie's Dante. Well, Ernie had the script for months at this point, and he was just there to feed lines to people. He had none of them memorized. He was stumbling over them and reading the part like he was playing Danny Zuko in Grease, not a slacker like Dante was. Vince Pereira and Walter were the ones to finally bring it up and be like, are you sure you want this guy in the movie you're dumping all this money into? This led to a very uncomfortable phone call with Ernie, where he finds out. And now remember, Ernie had a falling out with Kevin the last time that they had been around each other. An uncomfortable phone call where Ernie finds out that Mike is no longer Silent Bob. Kevin is. And he's no longer Dante, but he's now Rick Darris. Caitlin Bree was a little harder to cast. No one at the audition fit it. So Kevin went to Brookdale Community College, where he had taken some acting classes and sat in on a class. In that class was Lisa Spoonhour. Kevin followed her to her car after class and says, quote, excuse me, would you like to be in a movie?
No.
which she replies, not if it's porn.
Nice.
Imagine trench coat wearing Kevin Smith coming up to you in a parking lot being like, hey, want to be in a movie?
Right.
Not good. He ends up giving her a script. He puts his phone number on it and tells her to call him if she's interested. 2 days later, she calls him and he asks what she thinks. And she said, well, it certainly isn't porn, but everyone talks like it is.
Nice.
So there are a handful of people who only play one character in this movie. Brian O'Halloran is Dante. Outside of Kevin's movies, he hasn't had a lot of success in film, but made a lot of money just doing conventions and stuff.
That's where the money is anyway. That's where all the money is.
You're not kidding. I mean,
Yeah.
I've seen Brian O'Halloran set up at things that have absolutely nothing to do with film or pop culture. Like, I'm a nerd. I used to go to a lot of like gaming conventions. And I've seen him set up at things where like he's the only he was at like nerd gaming conventions. Like
it's like Virgil, to tie it into wrestling a little bit. I've seen Virgil set up at fucking every weird car show, mall,
Dude,
swap meet at a mall. Like,
yeah,
I agree. I saw Mike TV and the guy from The Last Dragon, the guy who played Bruce Leroy, at a million Comic Cons, and then I saw them at one of those monster truck, like car shows at the Javits Center. And Mike TV is at everything. Dude, who would even know? He was a kid in that movie. He still has the poster for Willy Wonka. Oh, unbelievable.
Oh, yeah. Brian is set up with the big Clerks thing behind him. It's good.
It's amazing. I did want to tie in, too. So Ernie, who ends up playing Rick Darris, like you said, he had a falling out with Kevin early on, and then obviously wasn't too happy about getting demoted again to a just a small character. But he does say in the Making of Clerks documentary that Ben Affleck has said that Rick Darris is his favorite character in Clerks, and that made him feel good about it, like after the fact. And it's funny to me because go back and watch the Rick Darris scene. Like, again, I love Clerks. That dude is fucking terrible at acting, man. It's the most awkward delivery of lines where he's like talking to that girl and talking about how much he benches and the way he pauses. And it's just like, it's not good that is not some good acting right there. It might be a funny scene, but I also think it's funny because like Ben Affleck is such a bro that's like his favorite character in the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, dude. So here's the thing though. You've met that guy before.
Oh,
you
for
know
sure.
What I mean? Like, so, but he does a really bad job. He's not a good actor. Can you imagine if he had been Dante? Like this movie, we wouldn't be talking about this movie.
No,
we would have never seen this movie.
We wouldn't.
Jeff Anderson mostly just did Kevin's films. He also pretty much hates Hollywood. Like a lot. He did make his own film eventually, though, like 12 years after Clerks. Marilyn Gigliotti did a lot of really small parts in a lot of films. And she's also been a makeup artist in a lot of stuff. She was a hairdresser, like by trade when they filmed Clerks.
She looks like a hairdresser.
She sounds
does.
like every girl I dated. She looks. It's exactly
like
how
New
she
Jersey.
Sounds.
Yeah, like New Jersey hairdresser, like that. She'd be like in the little like picture in the encyclopedia next to that. Like that's that's dead on for her.
That voice was every phone conversation I started with when I was trying to go out. I was like, oh, hey, how's it going, Maria? All right, yeah, gotta get home for pasta tonight. Let's go.
Lisa Spoonhour didn't really act afterwards. She did one movie and then she did like the voice of Caitlin Bree in Clerks the Animated Series in one episode, and that's it. And she recently passed away.
Oh no!
Yeah,
I don't know if you're going to mention any of this later, so I'll ask now so I don't forget. Do these people make a lot of money off this movie? Like these small people who weren't even really actors and were kind of only in this, because Clerks has been released so many times and yada yada yada. Like, are they like set for life from Clerks? Do they still make money off Clerks?
I don't know specifically. They obviously, like, anytime Clerks would air, anytime it sells, et cetera, they're going to get a cut.
Right.
Like, they're getting like quarterly checks or whatever. I don't know to what extent. Like, I don't know the details of the deal.
So there's no story where Kevin Smith was like, oh, you guys were, I couldn't have done my career without you, and gave them like publishing or anything. There's no story like that on this, right? Where he hooked them up forever. So
there's sort of stories like that, but not specifically with those folks. I mean, later on, Brian and Jeff definitely were set up to make a bunch of money, and it's, I think, part of Jeff Anderson's issues, which in the Clerks 2 episode, I'll probably get into a little more, but like long before it was cool to hate Harvey Weinstein, Jeff Anderson was on that fucking train. He didn't like that guy at all because he owed him a fucking bunch of money.
That's true. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Jason Mewes, I think we all know what happened with him.
Yeah. Famous Twitch streamer, Jason Mewes.
Yeah. That's all he's really known for, not heroin or anything.
No.
And Kevin ends up playing Silent Bob, obviously. Named Bob because of Twin Peaks Bob and Bob the Goon from Batman. So a lot of people play just like one role, like those people. And there's a couple of other people, like the guy who played the Chulies rep and the old man who watched the cat shit, and the other old man that dies. There's Rick Darris, he's the Heather Jones.
The dude who played hockey? Is that guy? Did that guy play multiple roles? The one who wanted them to open the store, and he went up there and started talking shit to them while they were playing hockey.
That guy does play multiple roles. We'll talk about him in a second.
Dude, that was one of my favorite scenes, but I'll get to that.
Ed Hapstack plays the hockey player in the store with the long hair. He also plays the female angry mourner outside of the funeral home.
Nice.
Kevin's sister played the caged animal masturbator. His mom played the milkmaid. There was a lot of that kind of stuff where like certain people just played one role, and a lot of them were like people's friends. Like Vincent Pereira plays a role, and his sister plays a role, and different things like that. Bellicose end up playing one role in the movie, but a couple of people were called on to play a bunch of roles. One of them was Scott Mosier. Scott Mosier plays Willem Black. He also plays one of the angry mourners outside of the funeral home, and he plays the angry hockey playing customer.
Wow.
When he first showed up, he had the beard from moving down from Vancouver. So they film all the Willem Black stuff, and then he shaves it off. And there's actually a scene in the movie where he yells at himself. Dave Klein plays the hunting cap smoking guy. He plays the Navy SEALs video customer. He plays the hubcap mini truck and magazine guy. He's the other angry mourner. He's part of the crowd at the door. And Walt Flanagan, man. Walt Flanagan is like everybody in this movie. He's the customer that walks up at the end after the Chulies thing and is like, a pack of smokes. He's the egg guy. He's the offended customer that Randall shows the fucking penthouse to.
I thought the egg guy was Ken Marino from The State for so long when I was younger.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until last night when I watched it again and really looked at him and remembered like, oh yeah, that's not Ken Marino at all. But he looks like him.
Yeah, and he's also the guy who's like, cute cat, what's its name? And he's like, annoying customer. Like, that's all Walt Flanagan. And that was based on the fact that people wouldn't show up because you weren't like getting paid to be in the movie or anything.
Yeah.
You just, you were there if you were there. So Walt Flanagan in a number of different outfits and wigs and stuff ends up playing these different roles in the movie because he was always there.
And it was early 90s. You couldn't get in touch with people if they weren't there. That's the innovation I'm talking about. Someone doesn't show nowadays. You could text and call and be like, "Where the heck are you?"
Yeah, you can call their.
Yeah,
you can call their landline and let it ring a bunch of times. But
right. But if they weren't there, you were like, "I'll never. I don't have any idea where this person is, nor will I ever, unless he tells me." So we might as well go on without him.
It's like how they say every episode of Seinfeld could be solved by a cell phone.
It's true.
Yeah.
There's one actor of note that I never hear mentioned in anything. And I figured this out because A, I'm a nerd, and B, I was digging through the IMDb. There's an actor in this movie named Mitch Cohen. Now, Mitch Cohen, unlike many of the other actors in this film, had been in a film before. There's a 10-year gap between Mitch's films. In Clerks, he's credited as the guy leaning against the wall, which Dante says, "Hey, get back here." When he's like, "Don't suck any dick going across the parking lot." But 10 years earlier, he was the lead in a huge film, The Toxic Avenger, where he played Toxie.
No shit.
Wow.
Yeah.
So wait, the guy who, when he's like, "Don't suck any dick on the way to your car," and he kind of just like starts walking after her, which is hilarious.
That's the Toxic Avenger.
Holy shit. Okay.
Wow.
Like, not when he's the nerd kid, but like the dude in the makeup, like the dude in the suit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Toxic Avenger is in Clerks.
Wow.
So the dialogue in the film's a little racy, right?
It would be a little problematic in 2021, to say the least.
There's a lot of things that are problematic in 2021 for this, yeah. It was problematic for Marilyn Gigliotti then, too.
Okay.
Yeah, she seemed a little taken aback by some of the shit she had to say, but came to terms with it, with the idea that like, oh, well, it's just a movie, right? Like, people won't think that that's actually me.
Yeah.
And here in a second, we will talk about like things that don't exactly fly now. But they rehearsed for a month, blocked out shots in the store, shooting at night, right? They did that prior to the 4 weeks before the shooting, where Dave and Scott show up. Those guys, along with Ed Hapstack, were basically the entire crew for the movie. Dave acted as DP. Scott did all of the sound during shooting. Ed acted as best boy, which is like head of electrical. Kevin directed. They also kind of just all did the lighting together, which was shitty. Like, it was just like work lights and shit bouncing off. Like, they would pull the cigarettes out of the upper area and bounce light off of there. But they were just using like halogens and work lights and shit that they had. And that's part of why it is in black and white and not color.
I believe Kevin Smith has referred to it as looking like it is shot through a glass of milk a lot of the movie.
Yeah. But like black and white, you don't have to worry about color temperature and stuff. So they were able to hide that there were like, you know, a dozen different light sources and fluorescent light and stuff easier. Also,
you
it
don't
was way
have to match.
shooter.
Yeah, you don't. I'm not sorry. You don't have to match anything too. Like, from a film perspective, like you don't have to spend a lot of time in editing making sure like the somebody's red shirt is the same red when you're cutting a bunch of scenes together. So it's way faster.
Right. So yeah, in addition to being cheaper, it was easier. The camera that they shot on was super loud. It was an Aeroflex SR, which Dave Klein said sounded like a machine gun.
Oh no.
Shooting overnight meant the gimmicks of the gum being stuck in the locks would make it harder to tell it wasn't morning. So that was kind of a thing where, you know, you had to be, the ingenuity had to be there. Otherwise, you couldn't really make the movie look right. There was no way they were going to be able to shoot from outside and make it look like daylight for half the film. Everything was also shot in 1 or 2 takes because of the cost of film. They couldn't afford to just film over and over and over again. That is also why they did all of the rehearsals like it was a play, which also, again, plays into you being like, oh, man, this kind of feels like I'm watching a play.
Yeah.
The first things that were shot were Randall telling Veronica that Dante was in love with Caitlin Bree, and then the 7-page dialogue scene between Lisa Spoonhour and Brian O'Halloran. The first take of that is in the movie.
Oh, wow.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's incredible.
The shooting schedule they had, though, was brutal. It was 3 weeks of nights, 10:30 p.m. to 5 a.m. But everybody still had their regular jobs. So Jeff Anderson worked in the mailroom at AT&T. Marilyn was a hairstylist. Brian O'Halloran worked for a barware manufacturer. Muse was a roofer. And Kevin worked at Quick Stop. For Jeff, that meant that his schedule was he worked at AT&T from 7:30 in the morning until 4:30 at night, and then shot from 11 at night until 5 in the morning.
It's pretty aggressive.
It's 2 hours of sleep. If you immediately went to sleep and immediately woke up.
I think he was probably sleeping in the afternoon, really.
Yeah.
I think he would probably get off work at 4:30, go home and sleep for like 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
And then get up and do it all over again. I mean, I guess at least there was coffee there all night.
True.
So to keep the production of the film discussion from going longer than it needs to, here's a few highlights of shit that happened during it. The cat in the film, whose name is Rad, it's Lennon's tomb. That was Vincent Pereira's cat. They did not let that cat shit for a whole day so that they could get it to shit in the box on film.
Oh, wow.
It shit on the second take.
Nice.
In the video store scene where he's rattling off all the porno titles, before it shot, Jeff was like, could we cut a few of these titles off the list? Like, my mom's going to have to see this. And Kevin was like, sure. So he takes the sheet, makes some marks on it, hands it back to Jeff. It has 3 additional titles added to it.
I think, when you have these movies when you're a kid and like certain lines become part of your like everyday vernacular, you and your friends say them all the time.
Yeah.
And big black cocks with pearly white cum, I think was said by my group of friends probably way more than it ever should have been.
And all those porn titles sounded 100% authentic.
Yeah.
Muse, a guy who was pretty famous for just, like whipping his dick out in front of people and doing and saying whatever he wanted to, was super embarrassed about shooting his scenes, and he would make everyone leave when he had to do his parts. He also had an incredibly hard time playing himself and would have to get drunk to shoot his scenes. Kevin had to like teach him how to play himself in the movie. And the only reason Silent Bob speaks at the end of the film is because Muse couldn't nail the line. That wasn't like a planned out thing.
There's some like no one could do that character the way Muse does, because there's sometimes that he delivers a line in the weirdest. It's like the words in the sentence are in the wrong order or something. Like they don't like what does he say about Olaf, where like he does not speak well like we do or something like that. Just the way he says that, but he
does not speak it well like we do.
Yeah, he like words a couple of the words in the sentence like very properly for some weird reason. And it's like you could take 100 takes and not get that weird thing that he does, but like 20 years later you remember that he says it that way, but it's so strange.
Well, dude, we're not going to get into it in this, but like later on they try to recast Muse, and that's a whole big thing.
Oh, wow.
Like in future films that you just hit on. Like nobody else can be Jason Mewes. It's just, you can't do that.
Yeah.
The only time the owners ever showed up when they were shooting happened to be the night they shot the fight and showed up to see their store destroyed.
Oh no.
Jeff Anderson and Lisa Spoonhour became a couple while shooting the film and got engaged within 3 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. The only reason the ambulance was able to be in the film is Kevin knew someone who worked at the ambulance station a half block away.
Wow.
The Russian hockey jersey that was in the movie was Kevin's actual Russian hockey jersey.
Oh, by the way, yeah, for that was so 90s. Every one of us in high school would buy the most obscure hockey jerseys we could find.
Yeah.
And that just, I still have it. I have my Grant Fuhr jersey on the Buffalo Sabres, real jersey with the fighting strap and the whole thing with the sewn on letter patches. And we would come to school every day and someone would have a different, like obscure, strange jersey. And dude, those scenes, I wrote it down too when they were doing I wrote Russian jersey. I know exactly where they were coming from with that one. That just did it.
Yeah,
That's
dude,
amazing.
I wanted that Russian jersey so bad. And like, to speak to what you were talking about, like I was a huge Penguins fan. Like I could have never imagined cheering for a different hockey team, but bet your ass I had a Satan jersey because it said Satan on the back.
That's right. Just like I have a JJ Putz jersey on the Seattle Mariners. It just says Putz on the back, and you just have to own those. Some you just have to own.
Yeah, it's so interesting being from the Midwest and watching a movie like Clerks, and it might as well be about some people from another country or something. It's like so exotic, but it's got to be interesting to watch it from a perspective of someone from that area. I mean, you're lucky. You have a bunch of media made about, films and TV shows made about your area. They don't make a ton of shit about Cleveland, but like, that's interesting that you're seeing things in the movie that are like, wow, that's dead on for, what people would actually do around here. Whereas when I'm watching it as a kid, I'm like, oh, this magical land of New Jersey. What is this like? Yeah.
Well, and I think for me, it was weird because like I spent my summers in New Jersey as a kid, but then I lived in Youngstown. So it was kind of like a mix of both. Like I didn't have the experience Josh had, but there were definitely things in it where I was like, oh no, that's Jersey. No, I know that.
Yeah.
Cue cards weren't really used in this, and like there's a common misconception that like Jeff read a bunch, like that he had his lines on the inside of the newspaper and shit when he would be reading, and that's not the case. He memorized everything except for like the fight scene and the salsa shark scene. There were cue cards used, and not really related to the production of the movie, but this story I pulled from the commentary for the, like, not the original commentary from the Laserdisc, but the second commentary they do on the 10th anniversary DVD. At some point, like a lot of times, like, so once filming was over, everybody went back to their normal lives, right? Except for Scott. Scott stayed to help cut the film. And they set the steam back up in RST video and cut the film there in the store. And a lot of times they would sleep in the store because Kevin's house was still fucked up from the flood, right?
Mm.
But occasionally they would go back and sleep at Kevin's house. And one of the nights that they did, Scott Mosier saw Kevin's mom naked. Which I think's funny. I don't. Also, while like Scott would work, or like while Kevin would work, Scott would work and edit the film. And then Kevin would take over when he got off work. So imagine like if you're just a person who lives in Leonardo, New Jersey, and you're like, oh, I'm going to rent a video at RST today, which from the sounds of things, not very many people did. You would walk in and there would be a whole Steamback set up in there with like film just hanging, strips of film hanging all over the store, and dudes editing a movie like while the video store was open. That's pretty crazy to me.
It's funny too. It's such a perfectionist. I don't know if that's the right word, but someone who, like Kevin, doesn't want people to change his dialogue. The idea of someone else editing his film and him only getting to edit parts of the movie that when he was available, and having to let someone else edit, because like no one wants their shit edited. That's why, you know, people release these unrated versions of movies now that are like 1,000 hours long. It's right. Funny to me that he like just handed someone else the thing while he was working and was like, here you go, you're editing now.
Well, I mean, he still had like the overview of it, and I think there was probably a lot of discussion of like, this is how this should be, and True. Scott was kind of just like doing, you know, like I don't know that I think it was still very hands-on for Kevin in that way.
Yeah.
Plus, it's not like Scott could really change what people were saying.
And wasn't Kevin working like next door? So I mean,
Correct.
he was probably there the whole time anyway.
Right. So once the movie was completed, Kevin showed it to his mom, who said, you spent $27,000 on that piece of garbage, which is the kind of motivational talk you want to hear from your parents. So they get the movie done, and the interest is starting to build on the credit cards that Kevin used to fund the movie, right? And he's trying to find a way to have it seen. So he had read an article by Amy Taubin about the IFFM, the Independent Feature Film Market, in the Village Voice. And he set that as his goal to get the film noticed, which had worked previously for Slacker. He submits and he gets accepted, and Clerks is going to play the IFFM. Now, in reality, to get accepted for it, you just basically had to make a movie that wasn't it had to be like watchable, right? And you had to pay them $500. So it's very much a pay to play kind of thing, but it did have the ability to get your shit noticed if you got a good spot. They got Sunday morning at 11 a.m. at the Angelica Theater. Now, Kevin, not knowing, assumed that it was a great spot, being at the end of a full week of the fest, right? He assumes it's going to be packed. The whole cast comes. And all week they had been there, like flyering for the show, and the streets were packed and everything looked wild, right? So Sunday morning comes around and they show up and it is a fucking ghost town. No one is there. There were very few people at the showing other than the cast. There was a young couple and there was an old guy. And at this point, Kevin Smith is freaking out, thinking, what the fuck have I done? I've dumped all this money into it. Holy shit, this isn't really a movie. All they do is curse. What the fuck has happened? And after the film, the old guy comes up to him and tells him how much he loved the film. And Kevin thanked him and assumed, it was just someone being nice to him. Well, he was being nice to him, but he did like it, and it would change Kevin's life. That old man's name was Bob Hawk. Bob Hawk was a consultant for indie filmmakers. Bob saw Clerks written up in the guide for the festival and marked it as a movie he had to see. When Bob leaves that encounter with Kevin Smith, he runs into Peter Broderick, who had written the article that Kevin used to budget the film, and tells Peter Broderick that he needs to watch it. The festival kept video copies of the film for people to watch if they weren't able to make the screenings. So Peter Broderick watches it, and he tells Amy Taubin to watch it. She calls the number that the IFFM had and asks to speak to Kevin and talks to Kevin's mom. Kevin's mom directs her where to reach him at. When Kevin gets the phone call from Amy Taubin, he thinks it's a prank call.
Oh, no.
Eventually, in talking to her, he explains that, like, look, I have the article that you wrote, like, taped to my wall. And she's like, oh, well, this phone call just took a wild turn. So she asks to see the film. He gets a copy of it so that she could include the film in her IFFM film wrap-up article for the Village Voice. An hour after that phone call with Amy Taubin, his phone rang again, and it's Peter Broderick, who tells him that he was told to watch the film and how much he liked it. When Kevin's like, how did you know to watch my movie? Like, what is going on here? Like, I used your article to budget my film. What the fuck is going on? He was like, you don't know who Bob Hawke is? And Kevin was like, no. So Peter Broderick explains it to him. Another person who Bob Hawke told was John Pearson. John Pearson was a producer's rep, who that job is like to help sell films to distributors and negotiate deals, right? He had sold Slacker before this. He had sold Roger and Me before this. So it was like a big deal for Kevin to get this guy. And again, it's another weird Slacker tie-in on this. At that time, he decided to stop doing it. He wasn't doing that job anymore. But he watched the film and thought it was really funny and talked to Kevin and explained, like, look, man, I like your movie. I think it's really good, but I don't think the audience exists for it yet. So I'm not going to represent it. And so this leaves Kevin in a position where he's like, well, I'm fucked. And starts looking at it as, well, a year of film school, real film school, would have cost like $25,000. So, you know, maybe I'm just at where I'm at with this, and that's going to be what it is. Well, after about a week, his phone rings again, and it's John Pearson telling him that he had watched the movie a couple more times, and he's going to rep it for him. But some changes need to be made. Have you guys both seen the original version of this movie?
You know, I don't know. I couldn't even talk on it. I don't know what the original would be.
All I know about it is Dante is murdered at the end.
Yes. Yes.
That's the only thing I know, but I've never seen it. I just know that after Randall throws the sign to him, he walks out. He's like closed essentially, but like another customer walks in and like kills him and takes all the money out of the register.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, really? I had no idea. I had no idea.
And they wanted the supreme irony being like, I wasn't even supposed to be here today finally pays off. Like, yeah, you died, dude, and you weren't even supposed to be here.
Yep, exactly. And there's a scene earlier in the film where somebody unplugs the camera.
Oh, wow.
To plug something else in or cuts the wire to it. So no one would ever know who killed Dante either. Yeah. So that original ending's it's a downer, right? Like that's for a movie that's full of like funny shit, some dark shit, but funny shit. Like that's not like a funny downer or like a funny dark ending. It's just like a bummer. Yeah. And that's the way it read to Bob Hawke and Peter Broderick and John Pearson. And they're all like, Kevin, you have to change the end of this fucking movie. Like, if you're going to sell this to people, it cannot be like this.
And I'm not shocked that it was that dark original ending because the whole movie before it was Clerks was supposed to be way more of like a David Lynch, very artsy guys working midnight shift at that same store and then just like weird customers coming in and out.
Right.
So, I mean, the original version of Clerks, or what was it supposed to be called? The really bad name?
Inconvenience.
Yeah, the original Inconvenienced was supposed to be like super dark and weird. So, I mean, like, yeah, now to hear that he was supposed to die at the end is like, wow, that seems really off the wall. I don't think it's as off the wall because the original movie was supposed to be sort of dark, and that's probably kind of how we always wanted to end it. And then when it became what it became, it didn't really make sense to end it that way anymore.
Exactly. And so, like, Bob Hawke and John Pearson both told Kevin, like, look, I think you ended your film the way you did because you didn't know how to end your movie. So you just tacked this thing on the end. Why not just cut it where it ends now? And so that's how we got the version we have today, is somebody else did edit Kevin's movie for him.
Yeah.
And talked him out of a terrible ending to the film. The next person who becomes very important in this movie, being something that all three of us have seen, is Mark Trusk. Mark Trusk worked at Miramax Acquisitions. He had reached out to Kevin for a copy of the movie after hearing about it. In his own words, he smoked a joint, watched it, and liked it. Mark became like an evangelist for Clerks around the Miramax office. He involved John Gordon as well, who at the time was Harvey Weinstein's assistant. So he gathers up all of the younger staff at Miramax and some executives, including John Gordon, and they get Harvey Weinstein to sit down and watch this movie with them so he could see how much like a younger audience liked it. Harvey walked out after 15 minutes. Harvey Weinstein, in addition to being a giant piece of shit, was also a smoker. And the Chuli's gum scene didn't do it for him. Miramax passed on the movie. Do we want to talk about Harvey Weinstein, or do we want to just like leave it at he's a piece of shit?
Yeah, piece of shit works.
Yeah, piece of shit works.
Right on. So Bob Hawke was also on the advisory selection committee for Sundance, so all hope is not lost. He reaches out to Jeff Gilmore, Jeff Gilmore's title was like head of Sundance, but as is explained in some of the documentary stuff for Clerks, he basically has final say over what is or isn't in Sundance, or at least at that time did. Jeff Gilmore had a concern because there were some women in the office that found the movie objectionable and sexist. I'm not going to say they were wrong. But
yeah, I didn't know how much we were going to get into like how problematic things are now that were in the movie. But I mean, like,
now's the time.
Okay, so
now's the time.
For better or worse, I don't think more voices are getting heard in filmmaking now. Obviously, I don't think a movie about a bunch of white people dealing with white people stuff would necessarily be as impactful or even get made or cared about now, because there's such an emphasis on getting other points of view and other stories made, which is great because those voices never got heard before. But I think even just the fact that it is all like white men and the women in the movie are almost just props for the men to get their stories across, would be very like, not that I agree with it, would put it behind the 8 ball in 2021.
Right.
Aside from the fact that there's some hard F's in this movie,
But it's a period piece though. It really is. It's what the 90s were like.
Exactly.
Yeah, you have to take. Yeah, I mean, if people, you're just looking at the way people were then. I mean, it's not. I don't know if it's. Of course, it's problematic because of the language, but in general, it is what it was then, and you couldn't. It's not like it would be any different now. If you did something now with the year 2020, I'm sure there would be things in 40 years we'd say, "Wow, I can't believe they did that too." So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying anything good or bad about this movie because I don't really care. Whatever, it was fine. That mid-90s movie that Jonah Hill made, he put hard F's in that movie because he's like, we all said that word all the time. Like, that was just how kids talked. And if I'm going to make a movie about then, that's going to be in it. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I don't think, like I said, to analyze how problematic that movie is now, I don't even think makes sense to do because, like you said, why would you? But it's just funny that, like, after the Oscars a couple years ago, when people were like, Oscar's so white or whatever it was, and because all the movies were white people doing white people shit. And then, since then, it's been a lot of people of color and black people films getting made and films from women getting made and all that. I don't think that this movie would even get off the launch pad because people would be like, I don't, it's a bunch of white men doing, you can't put it in this world because it wouldn't exist in this world. This movie exists in the world of the 90s. You know what I mean? So even just on that level.
And to put it in perspective, I mean, so right now it's 2021. This movie was made in 93, released in 94. So we're talking about a world that is 28 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So 28 years before 1994, you're in a different world too. Like you've got to put things in. Like I feel like because life has become so blurry and while there have been innovations, like shit hasn't changed as dramatically as it did from like, say the 60s into the 90s as it is from like the 90s into now. I think it's much easier to try to paint shit from then with the brush of 2021.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I've never thought about that.
But like, there's shit that it would have been in a 60s movie that way wouldn't have flown in a 90s movie, and nobody says shit about that, you know? Like, so I take it as like, yes, is it inappropriate to use that word in that way? Fuck yeah. Was it inappropriate then? Fuck yeah. But it wasn't socially inappropriate then.
Right.
So it happened.
Do you get into the ratings thing in this at all? Because I was going to mention that.
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
That is coming up in a minute. Okay. So Jeff decides it's worth showing, and it shows at the 94 Sundance Film Festival. The entire main cast goes. So Brian, Jeff, both of the girls, and Kevin, and Scott Mosier. The first screening is on January 22nd, 1994. And for everyone, Kevin, Jeff, everyone, they all talk about how nerve-wracking it was, because it was really the first time they were going to see people react to the movie. When it showed at the IFFM, there was fucking nobody there. It was like a private screening. Now they're in a room with 300 people, and the crowd loved it. On the second night, Kevin did a Q&A. The first time he had ever done that in his life, and that really opens the door for a whole nother part of that dude's career, because for as famous as he is for making films, I think he's really given himself a second life as like not like a stand-up necessarily, but like his funny Q&As, and then like transitioning that into podcasts as things changed. The roots of that really happened there on that second night in Sundance as his film career is starting too, which I think is kind of interesting. The cast that week started getting approached by like casting directors about being in other movies, which I think is wild because none of them really end up in anything that matters. Kennedy from MTV interviewed Brian O'Halloran. Like, they all felt like something big was going to happen, right?
Fox News contributor and television star Kennedy.
Yeah.
Yeah, her life took a turn. Your friend Gideon, much better end game for him than Kennedy.
Yeah, if he listens to this, how come he doesn't send me back any DMs? Fuck, I look up, I try to get in touch with him all the time. Nothing. Guy doesn't respond ever.
I'm not sure Gideon Yago listens to this podcast, but man, I hope he does.
He's too famous for me now. That's the end
That's
of that.
him calling right now.
Oh, yeah. Let me turn that off. That's my mother-in-law's phone, in case you wonder.
What does Gideon Yago do now?
He was a blogger, and he was in war zones. He did a lot of things. I mean, he was pretty like he got in there and was pretty, it was a pretty big deal for a while. And I don't know where the rest of his career went, but he doesn't want to talk to me anymore. So sorry about that phone.
That's fine.
Josh owns the last landline, and it won't stop ringing.
It's the in-laws, and it is really not stopping.
What does that? What a phone ring sounds like now? It's a lady talking. Like, answer your phone.
They tell you who it is. They tell you who it is, and I don't have any idea what this is. All right, that's the end of that. Okay. All right.
So Mark Trusk forces Harvey Weinstein to go to the final screening on January 28th, 1994, and John Gordon pushed pretty hard for this too. The movie had been getting huge press at Sundance. It got write-ups in like the Hollywood Reporter. All like every major thing that would cover Sundance was talking about Clerks. So Harvey decides, after being an idiot before, I'll go watch this movie, right? But he's still not like super sold on it. So he comes into the movie just a few minutes before it starts, and everybody talks about how like when Harvey Weinstein walked into that theater, there was a hush. Obviously a different hush than there would be today if Harvey Weinstein walked into a theater.
Well, here's a Harvey Weinstein story for you. I worked on 99 Hudson Street for like 3 years. I worked for a pharmaceutical advertising agency, and it was the Weinstein building. And I never ever understood exactly what that meant being in that building. There were always famous people here and there, and you'd stop on certain floors on the way up to our loft, and we'd see the office. But I didn't know that's where he actually was. And I rode the elevator up with him once, and it was like him surrounded by 5 dudes all in black suits, laughing at everything he said, whatever. And I was sitting there, and I was wearing a hoodie, and have a messenger bag because we were business casual, so nobody cared, or casual what we wore.
Right.
And I've never seen more cringeworthy cowering to a person than these dudes who are around him, like laughing at every joke, blocking me off from him so I wasn't standing too close. It was very, very strange. And take the elevator up and watch these guys. Oh yeah, Harvey, you're the man. Harvey, blah blah. It was exactly what you think it would be. That's exactly what it was. Riding the elevator up with this dude. Yeah.
Well, in a rare moment from the sounds of things of people standing up to Harvey, Tusk and John Gordon both tell him that he can't get up from his seat and leave until he hears the number 37. Harvey ends up laughing louder than anybody else in the theater. So loud, in fact, that you could pick him out, and everyone described it as distracting.
Oh, no.
It was like Kevin Smith compared it to Robert De Niro in Cape Fear.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So they meet with Harvey across the street, and over some potato skins, they make the deal for Clerks with Miramax. The original deal gave Kevin an advance of $227,000, making back the 27 that he had put into the movie. Yeah. And $200,000, which was a life-changing moment. And it let Kevin do a lot of things for a few people who were friends of his. It allowed Vincent Pereira to make a movie called A Better Place. It allowed Brian Johnson, with some of Kevin's money and a deal he had at Miramax at the time, where he got to use some Miramax money. Brian Johnson got to make his film Vulgar.
Oh.
And it let Kevin open a comic shop for Walt.
Oh, wow.
Which we all know as the Secret Stash. So all those kind of things, like earlier when you were like, did Kevin do stuff for like the people that were in the movie? He definitely did stuff for his friends. And then for a lot of the people in the movie, I mean, he found places for Jeff and Brian in future movies, and then made Clerks 2, and like, he made sure that all those guys were in movies when they wanted to be,
Right.
I think he kind of did what he could to help those guys along in the business. Some changes are made to the final version of the movie once Miramax gets it and releases it, including adding a different soundtrack. Like, some of the music was in there originally, like that main theme in the beginning, that was always in the movie. But a large part of the soundtrack was added after Miramax took it over. That soundtrack cost more than the original movie did.
That's insane.
The music they added, the Soul Asylum and Bad Religion and Stabbing
You
Westward.
wonder why Keith Lee can't keep his theme song, but they could put in because it costs way too much.
Yeah, so the soundtrack Miramax added cost more than the original film. That film's original budget was $27,575. Once Miramax did everything they needed to do to get the film ready to be released, the budget was $230,000. The film made $3.2 million at the box office, which is okay. It did okay in theaters. For what the investment was, it did amazing. I mean, if you're Miramax, you're really happy with how much money you just made off that movie.
that's every Blumhouse movie that Blumhouse makes. They make a movie for $1 million, it makes $14 million, they walk away with all profit. That's exactly what that is now.
Right. But here's the thing. That's just the theater money, right? That movie thrived on VHS. It came out on May 23rd, 1995 on VHS and in video stores, and on Laserdisc on August 30th, 1995. Eventually, it finds its way to DVD once the format's popular on June 29th of 1999. And that original DVD was just the Laserdisc. They just ripped it down to DVD. We all saw that movie. I think all of us saw it on video, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody saw it in the theater.
No, I did. When I actually was kind of researching it a little bit lately, I was shocked to hear that it even had a large theatrical release. I wasn't even aware.
Yeah. It has made so much money in the home market. And that's really been the case for Kevin's stuff across the board. Like, some of his theatrical releases are considered like failures. Others are
a lot of his movies are better at home. I mean, I love sitting down and watching Mallrats or Dogma at home. I don't, even Clerks 2. I went to see it in the theater. Just something didn't feel right about watching that movie in the theater. I like Kevin Smith movies where I can sit and kind of either you're stoned or you're watching it, you're eating and drinking, and you're just kind of a little bit more like focused on it as opposed to a theater. It's just something doesn't feel right about a lot of his movies in the movie theater.
I would agree with that. So the best version of this movie for watching at home, I think, is the Clerks X DVD that was released in 2004. I like it better than the Blu-ray version. To be honest, there's only so good you can make this movie look. Like, it doesn't need to be on Blu-ray. I think that DVD version, you get like every version of the film. It's nice. But this movie has made so much fucking money on the home market. It far eclipses anything it ever made in the theater. It was also praised by critics. Roger Ebert, who has been pretty critical of a lot of the stuff I cover on my horror movie episodes, praised this film. It won the Award of Youth, the Mercedes-Benz Award, and tied for the Filmmakers Trophy at the 94 Cannes Film Festival.
What did it tie with? I'm just curious.
Oh, it was a movie I've never...
Okay, it wasn't anything... Okay.
No,
I was
it
just
wasn't
curious
anything...
if it was something famous. Yeah.
No, it wasn't anything famous. It was also nominated for 3 Independent Spirit Awards that year. It's made a ton of best lists over time. Like, something that I skipped over, and you mentioned it, Jonah, and I still missed it. In releasing this film, they had to go to war with the MPAA a little bit. Miramax did, because this film was originally given an X rating.
Yeah, it was NC-17.
Or yeah, NC-17.
And they had to get Alan Dershowitz, speaking of Harvey Weinstein, who's represented O.J. Simpson, Donald Trump, Jeffrey Epstein, and Harvey Weinstein to save Clerks. So if you want to thank someone for Clerks existing, thank Alan Dershowitz, because if it would have been NC-17, we wouldn't be talking about it right now.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man. I don't want to thank Alan Dershowitz for anything, but I think the bigger thing is to say, like, fuck you, MPAA, because they are a very arbitrary and unnecessary group, I think, that wields their power a little, I don't know, frivolously. That's the wrong word. They give people a bunch of hassle for shit they probably shouldn't, because they can. And I see it a lot when I cover horror movies. And I just think in 2021, we don't need a group of people to tell us what's dirty or not.
I mean, things need ratings so that people who care about ratings can make decisions, but it shouldn't mean anything to anyone who doesn't care, basically. Like, yeah, put a rating on it so people can know what it is before they go to it, if they're people that care about that. But it should hold no power to anyone normal at all.
Right.
Right. And I also don't think, like, if you're going to declare something's like inappropriate for like an NC-17 rating, should really just be for like graphic sex. Like, there's not.
Yeah, getting that for language is especially now seems insane because of all the movies that have come out since then that are and have like crazy shit in them now. It's
right.
So ridiculous to think that this was anything.
Even for violence at some points, I think it's kind of weird, because at the end of the day, it's not documentary violence. You know, it's simulated violence.
And I would argue, or not argue, I would find it interesting, because I don't even have to look it up. I'm sure it's true that they spent more on the legal battle to make this movie not NC-17 than like, imagine how many times more than Kevin spent making the movie that they spent just getting that rating changed, especially if they hired Alan Dershowitz.
I would imagine that's a big part of that $230,000, because there's only so much that you would need to do to this film to get it ready. You know what I mean? You add that soundtrack. You go through and like polish it up a little bit. That's not $200,000. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I bet it is. But that legal battle is probably part of that for sure.
Yeah.
So the final award that Clerks was given, and probably the highest award that it could ever be given, is in 2019. Clerks was recognized among 25 films that year, chosen to be added to the Library of Congress National Film Registry. And something that I'm sure makes Kevin Smith very happy is it went in alongside Purple Rain.
Oh, nice.
Do you guys have, so now we could talk about like favorite shit from this movie, like to kind of close things out on it. We've covered the whole story of the movie.
Yeah, let Josh kind of run this, because I feel like Josh has a ton of notes about like specific parts of the movie and put a lot of work into that. So Josh, why don't you?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, this movie to me will always be like, it's I mean, the minute I started writing, I was like, okay, this is exactly what I was doing. Like, even from the start, like when you see Dante with the messy rooms, like every one of us had the friend who you went to his house and you tried to call him and his phone was under like 8 t-shirts and his dog was sleeping over in the side. And the only thing he ever found was like an old flannel and his Doc Martens, you know, and he was always my buddy. He loved Nirvana. Everything he wore, he had his one red flannel and he threw on his Docs, and I never could wear Doc Martens. I have a 13 shoe. I hate Doc Martens. They just didn't feel right on me. But, and then Dante tucking his Z Cavaricis into his boots, and, you know, the simple times of like, in this is just even in the first like 10 minutes, the sugar in a pig container, you know, putting it into his coffee. And I wrote, like the quick stop. I remember opening when I worked at the bagel shop. Like, it was always miserable. There were always surprises when you opened up from the night before, you know, like the coffee machine overflowed or someone didn't clean up the right thing. And now you have to get stuck mopping all morning, you know, and like that whole feeling, like, and the soundtrack, the 90s soundtrack, anytime I hear Soul Asylum, like my heart like sings, you know, like, that whole beginning was exactly what I did when I was 18, opening up my senior year of high school, opening up the bagel store at 6:30 in the morning. You know, someone didn't want to go and I was hanging out too late the night before, and I tried to call in sick, but my mother wouldn't let me, you know, and like it just was what it was to grow up in New Jersey at the time. But you know, that was just that whole beginning, cutting the newspapers out of the twine, getting it on the rack, getting ready, you know, putting the coffee filters in. Just every little bit of that was what it was like to be like 18 to 22 from like in the 90s. And it you know, that always spoke to me. Like the rest of it, the conversations, the Chuli's gum guy, you know, throwing the trachea tube on the table. Remember high school, they told us about the trach tubes and the stoma. And like, that was like my worst fear when I was a kid. I was like, I'm not having somebody put a hole in my throat, you know, like it just everything about that just screamed out what I was growing up, you know, to do. And he was like, $30 a week you're spending on cigarettes. And I'm like, when I was smoked, you know, 4 cartons in a week when I was in college, I'm like, $30, that's nothing. It was $20 for a carton. Like, you know, those kind of like things, just remembering how, you know, much cheaper things were, and calling Dante cancer merchant. I mean, I was howling at that. Like, when we just would do that in high school, and they'd be like, you don't smoke and you get cancer, and everybody get angry at people selling cigarettes. And oh man, I just took down everything that they said, and you know, even down to Randall not opening the store in time when we would go to Dr. Video and the guy wasn't there yet, so we're waiting outside with quarters to play Street Fighter because the guy wasn't in, you know, he wasn't in the store yet, and we really wanted to rent an old WrestleMania from like 1991, and they had it on VHS, and we had to get in there and pull it out of the section. It just, everything about it was life for me, and that's all, you know, every bit of Kevin Smith. This movie was, I could go on forever. Every single scene, I could tell you the same exact thing. You know, wedding announcements in the newspaper. Who the hell puts wedding announcements in a newspaper anymore?
Yeah.
You know, like it and that
who has a newspaper anymmer?
Yeah, he calls up on a payphone. I mean, my daughter saw a payphone in the city, and she was like, "What is that?" I was like, "That's a payphone. We didn't have." You know, she has no idea what it is. She's like, "That's what you used to talk on the phone." I'm like, "That's it. That was what we used." You know, and You never get in touch with anybody, and it just, it just captures everything. And I think if I went over every bit of it, you'd be like, okay, we get it, but it was, and it is to this day, it will always capture what I was like in the mid 90s to late 90s.
I would agree with that. I mean, it got me to like, when I lived in Kent, I was like, well, I guess I'll get a job being a clerk. And I did, because I was like, oh, well. And so I remember like cutting the papers, and you had to build the fucking newspaper.
Well, but also I have here, you worked as a clerk. You could still enjoy your life. Like, it wasn't a job where you felt, you weren't going to get paid, or you weren't, you could be a clerk every day, and then you could go out at night and hang out. You could have a car. The guy that I work with at the bagel store, he bought a car off of, our bagel store money. Like, you could do those things in the mid 90s. Like, now everything feels so far away. Every bit of life feels a lot more far away when you're doing something as opposed to it did then. And that's maybe because I'm a grumpy old man, but that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I also love with Clerks the way it sets the framework for the future films in like the View Askew universe, where like, especially with like the first three, so much tie in to like where it's all kind of within the same few days. And so many characters have like connections to the other films. And that's a thing that really kind of didn't exist then in movies, that was kind of, and I'm not insinuating that this was like stolen by Marvel, but like creating like that Marvel universe thing is sort of like, this is like the framework for that kind of idea, which I think is kind of cool.
What about the Star Wars scene, and they're playing that song, that Chewbacca song? Do you remember that song?
I do. I specifically bought the Clerks soundtrack because that song was on it.
Yes.
Because I couldn't find it anywhere else.
Yeah, I always talk about CD visor CDs, right? Like a CD that was in everybody's CD visor in their car. So like the Crow soundtrack, right?
Yeah.
Or like Judgment Night soundtrack, or like there's just CDs that everybody had, and I feel like the Clerks soundtrack was definitely in the mix for a CD. It was like your prototypical like CD visor CD.
Well, Jonah, let me ask you something, Jonah, because doing the movie review with Stacy, I know about his experiences at the video stores. What are your younger Jonah stories about going to like the mom and pop video stores?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was saying. I was a bigger kid, as a hefty boy. Didn't have a ton of friends, and we had Imperial Video and Tanning. It was a video store that had tanning beds in the back.
Oh yeah.
And all the video cassettes were on the wall in the video games, and then they had little paper tags that hang from little hooks, and you took the little paper tag off the hook and brought it up, and that's how you rented the video. And if the paper tag was missing, you knew the video was out. So I mean, she would take me there usually Friday after school. I'd get to pick, like, I think I was allowed to pick 2. That's probably why I had Clerks and Mallrats. I was allowed to pick 2 videos. She didn't really care about ratings or anything. I could pick whatever. My parents are hippies. They kind of just thought I should do whatever. And I'd get to watch my 2 movies, and sometimes they were duds. That was like, we always romanticized that period of time because, it's like with music, we would have to drive an hour to Cleveland to go to a record store that had like punk music and hardcore. We'd pick 2 CD, we'd have money for like 1 CD. We'd buy it and listen to it on the way home. And sometimes it sucked, and you just took a 2-hour trip to buy something and spend all your money on it, and it was terrible. So you're just kind of flying blind when it comes to picking these things out. But yeah, in Imperial Video and Tanning, and then another place opened up, which I believe was called Box Office Video. We didn't really have Blockbuster till later, although I do remember going to Blockbuster maybe at the end where they kind of got rid of late fees and stuff. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, Imperial Video and Tanning, rented all our Nintendo tapes there. That's where I rented Clerks and Mallrats. But yeah, it was a special time for me too. Like I said, I didn't have a lot of social life then. So I mean, I would rent the videos, and that would be what I would do.
Well, I think it's.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. No, I'll talk about it later. I was looking at Dante's hands a lot of the movie because of how they were acting, and I noticed he had the rings on his fingers, and I just remember back to like I had thumb rings all through high school and college.
Yeah. And
I was like, oh, I remember that. Like I had a square thumb ring and a round thumb ring, and I thought I was the coolest fucking dude on the earth.
I think it's interesting that he touched on the fact that there were shitty video stores and good video stores. And that's definitely true. Like there were always like the plaza shitty, like they only have a small selection of tape stores, and then there were like the giant massive, like we didn't have Blockbuster either, but we had this local chain called Video Safari that was enormous. Like it went into where Joann Fabrics had used to been.
Oh wow.
So it was like this giant, like half of like a big box store that was funny. All videos.
It's funny, the big payoff for that joke that he wants to go to, what's it called, Big Choice Video?
Yeah, Big Choice Video. Is that he goes...
the big payoff, which I'm nitpicking here, but it doesn't make total sense, is that he goes there to rent this really crazy raunchy porn because they don't carry it at his video store. He orders all the porns at... he orders all the porn at his video store, and those big chain video stores didn't even really carry much porn. So, like, I always thought the payoff of that joke didn't make total sense, but it is funny, I guess, that's what he ends up picking when he goes to the other video store.
Now, also, Stacey, you talked about the universe is connected, but the cigarettes in Clerks were not nails.
They were not.
No, but they were nails in every other one of his View Askew movies, but they weren't nails in Clerks.
Well, that's because he didn't know about film rights, and he just put, the real stuff that was in the store in the store.
Oh, okay.
Like, figure.
I mean, you see the Marlboro logo on the Marlboro Light when he's like picking him up off the ground, and talking after they get thrown at him. You clearly see the Marlboro logo on the cigarette, and there's a lot of that, like the Gatorade logo. There's a Ghostbusters logo in the background when they're in the video store. Like, I noticed a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, there's Gatorade vocally talked about in the movie.
Right.
That would all be like paid product placements that you wouldn't include Gatorade unless they gave you money now.
We did that so much. The Gatorade where my friends would come into the bagel store and be like, I'm just gonna grab a Snapple, and I'm like, don't grab a Snapple. I gotta pay for the Snapples if you guys are gonna grab the Snapples. Like,
right.
That's exactly what we were doing as kids. I mean,
only
right
fountain
on the money.
drinks. Take the fountain drinks.
I'll give you water. I'll give you the seltzer from behind the counter. Just do not take the Snapple. $2.
Last night I was just talking. If you were to some people, if you were a teenager and you weren't going to someone's work at a place and not stealing everything, you were doing it wrong. Like if you were going to skate or going to do whatever, hang out at the mall or Denny's or whatever. And I was saying, like, I've been in more restaurants' kitchens that I didn't work at, just making random shit and making food. Everyone was doing that back then. Like, oh, my friend works at Domino's. We're just going to go in the back and make a crazy thing and like walk out. You know what I mean? Like, that shit.
We
that's
did it
just
all
what
the
you
time.
did.
Breakfast sandwiches. My friends would come in at 7:00 when the door opened. I'd make them bacon, egg, and cheese, or Taylor ham, egg and cheese. And we were just handing it out, or I'd give them leftover cookies or whatever we had. And then people would take stuff off the front counter. Every time we were robbing those guys. I think the owners knew when you have kids work for you that they're going to take it. So.
Oh, you mean a pork roll, egg and cheese, right?
Yeah, same thing.
I'm just kidding. I know. Isn't there an argument over Taylor ham or pork roll?
But I'm from Long Island originally, so it was always Taylor.
Yeah, it's
ham.
regional. Yeah, it's regional. Yeah.
But the other thing I had here as we got closer to the end of this was that fight at the end between him and Dante and Randall, and the way they fought each other was the way that me and my friends would fight each other if we got that mad. Like there was never until you got popped in the eye, then it was over. If somebody got hurt, like my brother and I would fight, and he would knee me in the mouth, or I'd elbow him, and if somebody was bleeding, it would be over. That was it. And that was so like typical. That scene was like perfect. It didn't feel overly staged.
I remember like the first time I saw Clerks, like I saw it at home, but I saw it because a dude I knew's older brother had watched it, right? And he had came in and watched it, like caught it like partway through when his brother was watching it. And he was like, dude, we have to get Clerks and watch it. And we got Clerks and watched it, and it felt like a weird, like it didn't feel like watching other movies. You know what I mean? Like, it felt like you were getting this window into a world that you were not aware of prior. Which I thought was really fucking cool.
Yeah, and it will always, Jonah was right and about, that time, it wouldn't be accepted now, but it'll always be there as like
it shouldn't be accepted. It shouldn't be accepted now. That's not even a conversation. That's like it's like not even a sentence that should make sense to even say that movie should be looked through a lens of now speaks to like how period specific that movie is.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. It will always be that. It would always be trapped in that time. Like it'll never have the shelf life is for people. I think when we're 60, anybody who's 20 years younger than us cannot appreciate Clerks as much as, as probably we did and just knew what it was.
Oh,
you know what I
exactly.
mean? Like, yeah.
I think for younger kids now, it's more of a thing where, like, I don't know if I have a good example of this because I don't think there were really movies like this, but like to me, it's almost like the equivalent of like you can watch the movie Woodstock and it gives you an idea of like what life was like at Woodstock.
Yeah.
But you have no relation to it because it was, like a decade before you were born, right?
Right. I was really interested because I love Dazed and Confused. It's still one of my favorite movies. And
Me too.
I was really interested in watching that with my parents and being like, is this like real? Is this like, did they nail it? Is this realistic? And they were kind of like, nah, I don't know. Because my dad was like a total hippie, right? And totally politically active and all this stuff. But he was from a redneck town in Mineral City in Tuscarawas County in Ohio. So it's like, I thought this was going to totally nail it. And even with that, he's like, yeah, kind of. He's like, there's some stuff in there and there's some stuff that isn't, you know what I mean? But that is something I was really interested in. And now I guess, someone asked me if Clerks accurately depicts the time we were in, I would totally say yes. It's a little different because it was made during it, I guess, than to compare it to Dazed and Confused, which is made after the fact. It'd be like mid-90s. Did mid-90s nail the 90s? Nah. There's some parts in it where I'm like, nah, they
when you watch movies that are supposed to take place in the 80s and you're like, that's not what it, just because you put them in, you gave them a mohawk and put them in neon clothing. That's not the 80s.
Speaking of my film school friend, Matt Schmidt, it's like, we talk about this shit all the time. You watch Stranger Things and every single character has like 40 pieces of like flair on their body. That's like 80s specific. Like no, that's not what everybody dressed like. People just wore like normal clothes and like maybe you had a hat with like like an old school Reebok logo or something on it. But like every piece of your clothing and body and everything you talked about wasn't like an 80s reference, you know what I mean? That's what people get wrong, Dude,
that's the best I've heard, by the way. That is spot on. I tried to put, sometimes when I watch movies like that, I try to put, like, I can't put my finger on what's wrong, and you're spot on.
There's too much.
They're just they're like, here's a hammer, and the hammer is the 80s, and I'm going to hit you right in the face with it. And
they're like, you're not going to know that Stranger Things took place in the 80s unless we put like like a Nintendo and Atari logo on like every single fucking piece of clothing in the scene.
Well, and so the things that I think they got right was like the one kid's hat that screams like that is what somebody would have had in the 80s. Like that hat with no fucking logo on it.
Right. Well, that's what Clerks got. That's what Clerks always be. The Pittsburgh Penguins jersey and everything else. The Doc Martens, you didn't have to slam it in your face when you see somebody talk about the 90s. The way his pants were tucked in, and the video store. You don't have to say it's 1994 and you're in a video store. It's just a video store, and that's where the movie took place.
I would include Randall's light denim jacket in that.
Yes,
too.
the members only.
And it's different because it was made at the time, you know what I mean? And I guess to speak again to something that I really love, I feel like Wet Hot American Summer did it right because they weren't cramming all that shit down your throat. Everyone just kind of had normal clothes on. I mean, you probably went to Jewish summer camps, I'm sure, Jay Gold.
Dude,
I assume Wet Hot American Summer kind of nailed it, you know what I mean? Because it's not like over the top, there's not crazy product placement in every single, prop and piece of clothing in the movie.
That's right. That's exactly right. When you don't have to slam it over someone's face, like I don't need to see a movie where they're like, this movie takes place in the 80s, and then they start the movie and it says 1980 at the bottom.
Right,
you know
right.
I mean?
And Flock of Seagulls is playing, and everybody's hair is like gelled up and like, yeah. Like, there was normal people.
I think conversely, though, if you make a movie, like say 10 years from now, about the past 10 years, everything is so commercial that you would have to have it look like that for it to be accurate. Yeah. Think about how many people their whole aesthetic is just based on all of the shit at Hot Topic.
Retro, right? Everything's retro.
That's the other. Like, I'm curious if Clerks is resurging now with younger kids at all, only because the 90s are so popular right now with fashion and everything. I'd be curious to see if younger kids are getting into movies like Clerks and Mallrats.
I'd like to hope so. Look, in the end of all this, because I love this so much, I was so happy to do this with you guys. I'd like to hope that those movies get a little more play, not just because people want to say they saw them or I don't know, but they were written well. And Clerks, in the end, I think it's a cool story. And to listen to this podcast, the whole how it was made, I hope that more people want to do that, because I'll go see it. I saw a movie I never heard of I saw a trailer for it one day on YouTube. It was called Ink. And I went to this theater in the city and in 2010, and it just so happened the director was there and he signed a copy of DVD, and I walked out before the Q&A because I was sitting in the front row. I got there late. And when I walked out before the Q&A, all the people in the theater were looking at me like I was nuts, like I didn't know who this guy was. And why are you leaving? And I was like, oh, why is everybody staying? And the director comes out and he's like, I just want to thank everybody. And I'm in the middle of the aisle with like a soda.
Oh, no.
Me and my friend. And we're leaving and they're looking at us. And I'm like, I got a copy of the Blu-ray. What else do you want me? Like, what else do you want me to do? I bought a ticket. I don't know anything. Just let me leave. I just hope that more people want to see it and we get more stories like that. And, you know, that's really how this movie affected me. It just is. It is me from the 90s.
Just to kind of wrap up what I said earlier, my very messy music comparison to Third Eye Blind is, I think over the course of doing this episode with you guys, I've sort of modified that answer a little bit, because I don't know, when I saw Clerks, I think I was like, give me more, you know, like obviously I loved it so much. I just wanted more. And I know I'm not going to end this by shitting all over Kevin Smith, because you guys all know I don't like him and I don't like any of his other movies except for maybe Mallrats, which I'm going to watch tonight because I don't remember. But I don't know. It just feels like he recorded. I loved Clerks, and he's like, cool, Clerks was good, and then he just recorded, like, to compare it to a song. Like Clerks was like the Ramones, right? And he just like made this perfect, simple punk movie, right? And then because people liked it, he just took those same punk songs and just recorded more bloated and like shit versions of them that nobody asked for, because everyone just wanted more Clerks. My personal opinion. And then it got to where we are today with the latest one that I turned off after I tried to watch it just because I had to know what it was.
Which
I
one?
turned it. The new one that just came out. What is that?
The reboot, Jay and Silent Bob. Reboot? Yeah.
And I just turned it off. And so it's like, you know, you had this perfect piece of art. Because I feel like, you know, Clerks is like a piece of art and the rest of his movies are like movies, which is fine. That's going to happen to everyone. But I mean, I just feel like he took this sort of like simple thing that spoke to so many people on such a simple level, and they just got more bloated and like, then he starts putting himself in bigger roles in them and jerking himself off. And then it's just like, I don't know, man. It's not for me. But again, that movie is such a huge part of my life and why I think I got into film. And I love hearing that it's still inspiring kids today to get into film. And again, that's a great gift that he got to pay back. Richard Linklater's Slacker got him into film because of how simple it was to do things. And I think it's really nice that he got to pay that back to people and still gets to pay that back to people. So
I would agree. And I think the big thing for me too is like Clerks is, as much as it isn't an art film, there's art to it. Like there's substance. It matters. And there's like, for me, there was like the DIY ethic of it was such a big deal. Like Clerks feels like pure, like I hate the music comparison too, but it's like that DIY punk band that you get into and you're like, oh man, this band rules. And then like, if they get picked up, shit changes and you're like, oh, I don't know if this rules as much anymore.
Right. And it's a series. Clerks is like a series of vignettes. I mean, when you watch that, you had never seen anything like that before because there was no artsy indie sort of movies around at that age too. So you're like, it's like hearing like you said, like a DIY punk band for the first time, because you're like, holy shit, I didn't know music like this existed. You're like, holy shit, I didn't know movies like this existed. But then Kevin Smith starts making movies like movies that did exist. Right. So, I mean, that's where he lost me.
Yeah, and I think, and that's the thing is like the rest of it is more of like it's like the band you like puts out a record on their own and then they get signed to Epitaph and they make records that like Epitaph would put out.
Right.
And so like that's where Mallrats and stuff goes, and I think there's a place for it, and I like those movies, but I don't think anything that he makes after Clerks has the same spirit as Clerks had, because it would be hard to. It'd be impossible.
Yeah.
Right.
With the exception, I think it would be absolutely impossible. I think the exception is eventually down the road, and it's one of the movies that's going to be covered much later in the year, when he makes Red State. I feel like Red State has a little bit of that same feeling, only in the fact that he has ventured into something new and different again.
Yeah, I saw that at Radio City. He did a Q&A afterwards, and it was when he kind of like traveled the country.
Right.
And I saw that at Radio City. I don't know. To be honest with that one, it felt very horror movie-esque, almost like he was trying to be. Yeah, he was trying to be Eli Roth, where Eli Roth was doing when Eli Roth did Hostel, and Kevin Smith was like, "Oh, I'm going to try to do something that everybody wouldn't expect from me, and do this horror movie." I don't know. It didn't have the same spirit to me as any. I like Kevin Smith for his lightheartedness. I didn't need to see that, but it is. Everybody has their own opinion on those later movies.
Right.
I think he bought himself a lot of goodwill with a lot of people with Clerks.
Yeah.
He just didn't buy enough of it from me. But again, I'm never gonna ever tell anyone that they shouldn't like what they like. I'll tell you if I think it stinks. But I mean, if you loved Clerks so much that it made you cool with everything else he did, then good for you, man. Like, I wish there was more shit I liked.
Yeah.
Would either of you guys have anything you want to plug?
Jonah's got some kind of show, doesn't he?
I think he does.
Yeah, listen to so PodVanDam, we're in season 6. We just started. We're sort of retooling the show now. We are a wrestling adjacent podcast. We have guests from the world of wrestling, and we talk about, I don't even know what the fuck we talk about. Food? I don't even know. But it's an hour-long show. It's called PodVanDam. It is. I am the producer on the show. Ed and Pat are the main people on the show, and it's on iTunes. Check that out. It's once a week. It comes out on Tuesday at 11 a.m. And be nice to go check that out. And I stream on Twitch a lot less than I used to, but I'm Tamiguchi on Twitch if you want to head over there too.
And if you have an Amazon Prime subscription, which I found out this was a thing, you have a free subscribe on Twitch. So if you're not using it, just give it to Jonah. That's what I did.
Yeah, I get $2.50 every month out of it, and it costs you nothing. And if you don't want to give it to me, give it to Jason Mewes, because that guy streams. And I wanted to mention, if you want to talk to Jason Mewes, go to his Twitch stream, because there's only like 200 people in the chat room, so he's probably going to end up reading what you talk to him in chat. Or I mean, there's ways you can if you donate a certain amount of bits or like a couple bucks, he'll read your stuff. So I mean, like, if you want to interact with Jason Mewes and you're a huge Kevin Smith fan, go to his Twitch stream, because there's not very many people in there.
That is awesome. I was unaware of that.
Yeah. Just him playing video games, but there's only a couple hundred people in chat, so I mean, he's bound to read something you write in there.
Right. Josh, do you have anything you want to plug?
If you want to watch somebody spiral into madness, you can read my Twitter. Otherwise,
and what is that Twitter? Because to be perfectly honest, man, I fucking like your battle that you had with the mayor of Hoboken last year was some of the most entertaining shit on Twitter that I saw during the entire quarantine.
Well, that's I'm just shouting into the void, but JGold12, and I love just chatting with everybody, and it's Twitter's a hoot when it's done right. So with you guys who we talk to together, and we run some stuff and we have fun on it. That's the main reason for it. So that's all. And I really love doing these podcasts with you guys. You guys are really talented at what you do. So
well, thank you.
Yeah.
And thank both of you guys for coming on and doing this. I know that especially for you, Jonah, you've got a lot going on right now.
My new roommate is always hungry. And she always wants to sleep, and she always wants to wake up, and she poops herself a lot. So I appreciate my awesome wife for taking my new roommate for a couple hours for me to get to do this, because I had a lot of fun. I appreciate you asking me to be on, especially with Corona and everything. I don't really get to talk to anyone this much about like something. Like, I see Lauren's, like, my in-laws, and I see Lauren, but we're not like dissecting films from when I was in film school. So it's really nice to be able to like flex the muscle every once in a while of things I don't really get to talk about. So I really do appreciate you having me on.
Oh, no, man, no problem. Thank you for being on. And Josh, I know you've got a lot of shit going on too, and I'm glad to hear the good news about Friday.
Yes, sir. Friday we will move this operation to the benefactor's compound, Long Island. So next time we all talk together, I'll be there on Friday.
Congrats, man.
And thank you to everyone who listened to this episode. It's a new thing. I don't know how many of you are going to listen, but I hope it's enough of you. And for those who still like Kevin Smith movies, next month we're going to move on to Mallrats, with another member of PodVanDam, Pat Franklin, and someone else who I am very excited to have on, Magnum CK.
Wow.
That's outstanding.
So until then, we're closed.